All right. Welcome, everybody, to the March 29th, 2023 City of Edina Planning Commission meeting. On behalf of the rest of the Planning Commission, we are grateful you are here today in person and those tuning in. As I always mention, your curiosity, participation, and feedback is vital to this process as we together navigate change here in Edina, specific to how people want to use their land. So like most meetings, we have a typical agenda. We'll have an opportunity for the community to speak about an item not on the agenda tonight. That's a community comment period, followed by the public hearings, which is your opportunity to speak about an item on tonight's agenda. And that will be followed by our reports and recommendations, of which we have 3 tonight. A TIF district resolution, development review process conversation, and a sketch plan review. And then that is followed with chair and member comments and staff comments. So for those tuning in, I'll give you some info to get connected to the public hearing remotely. There is one public hearing tonight. Individuals who want to provide testimony remotely can call 786-496-5601. Let's try that again. 786-496-5601 and enter conference pin 864-2813#. That gets you into the waiting room, and then press *1 on your keypad when you would like to get in line to speak. The public hearings aren't quite yet, so I'll let you know when that comes. Everyone who is ready for the public hearing would like to speak, please state your full name and address. You have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll let you know when your time is out. It is important to know that all feedback has been received by us and reviewed by us prior to the meeting. We gather that through our engagement website, bettertogetheredina.org. So you do not need to submit the same feedback in another way. All feedback's considered equally, regardless of the way in which it was submitted. With that, we will get on to our agenda. So first, we'll call the meeting to order. There we go. And now we'll do roll call.
Commissioner Miranda.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Padilla.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Hu.
Here.
Commissioner Day.
Here.
Commissioner Strauss.
Here.
Commissioner Bornstein.
Here.
Commissioner Olson. Here. Chair Bennett.
Here. Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the meeting agenda for tonight. I have a proposed change, if people don't mind, before I welcome a motion. We have the development review process conversation before the sketch plan review. Unless there's a time commitment for that, it'd be nice to allow the developer to get out of here before we talk about that. So I'd propose moving item B in section 7 to item C to allow the sketch plan review conversation to occur beforehand.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, next we'll have the approval of the prior meeting minutes from March 15th, 2023. Before I welcome a motion, does anyone have any proposed revisions? Hearing none, welcome a motion.
Motion to approve. Last meeting.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So moved. All right, next, like mentioned before, we have the community comment period, and this is the opportunity for residents to share relevant issues or concerns. This is specific to items not on tonight's agenda, so and specific to those who are here in attendance tonight. Welcome anyone who is here for community comment to come to a podium to speak. Seeing no takers, we will close that item and move right along into our public hearings for tonight. Minute behind, sorry. The first we have is a rezoning for 4404 Valley View Road. The order of operations here is city staff will provide a presentation based off of their staff report. We will field questions as a planning commission. It'll turn over to the developer or applicant for their chance to give a presentation or answer questions, after which it'll become a public hearing, and that's the opportunity for residents to come up and speak. We'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission to deliberate and make a recommendation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director Teague for the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. This property is located in the Valley View Wooddale area. Note that it's just east of Wooddale on Oak Lawn and Valley View Road. This is the old Burley Hair Salon site. You can see this is a older aerial here that shows the previous building that was on the site. It's currently vacant today, and the surface parking lot that used to be there. Prior to the hair salon, it was a gas station. The site is zoned Planned Commercial District, PCD 1, guided in our comprehensive plan for neighborhood node. So to provide a little background on this request for our new commissioners, and just to back up a little bit with this project in the last few years, this request, or a request for a subdivision of this property, was in front of the City Council about a month ago. The Planning Commission may recall that subdivision coming before the Planning Commission. The purpose of the subdivision was to establish individual lots for each unit. What you're seeing on the screen is the approved site plan for this site. It was approved back in September of 2022. So the purpose of the subdivision was to create a lot for each unit so they could be sold individually rather than rented. So concern that was brought up at the City Council was in regard to the potential for commercial use of the site. Again, because the site is zoned PCD 1, commercial uses are a permitted use there. So the concern being, should these structures be built? Could they be turned into commercial use in the future? They could as a permitted use. Of course, they would have to provide parking for it. So likely that kind of a request would come before the Planning Commission and City Council. Nonetheless, there was some concern there. With this residential use that's been approved for this site, originally back in 2017, a conditional use permit was issued for the site. Multi-residential housing is a conditionally permitted use in the PCD 1 zoning district. So that was approved for the Edina Flats project. Initially, that condo that was approved, there was a 4-unit condo building approved for the site with the Edina Flats. That was never built. And the plan that you're seeing on the screen replaced that Edina Flats plan. So it is a 4-unit row house. There was a number of variances that were also approved. So because of that commercial concern for future land use, the city attorney has recommended that we rezone the site to planned unit development. What we would do is then write a specific ordinance specific for this site, and I'll show it in a minute, that prohibits the use of commercial uses as a primary use. So the request this evening is a rezoning from PCD 1 to planned unit development. So the primary issue for consideration here is the proposal reasonable to justify PUD zoning for the site. So again, the main purpose here is to not allow traditional planned commercial use on the site. The proposal meets the city's PUD criteria as outlined in the staff report. The proposed townhome project would provide a more appropriate transition of land use from single-family homes to the north and the east as the area transitions into the commercial node. One of the things that we talked about when the small area plan was developed was having the more intense commercial uses closer to the Valley View Wooddale intersection with residential uses around the edges. And that's what this proposal is. The type of housing that's provided here is also can be considered a missing middle. It's not single-family residential, but it's a little bit higher density. Not an apartment type So that missing middle that we're looking for. There are 2 guiding principles in the small area plan that was created for this site that addresses this. The first, in regard to housing, sites should be allowed to transition to housing from business uses in response to changing market demands. So as I mentioned, the previous uses on this site were commercial. Market forces led to this housing type of project that was approved last year. Another of the guiding principles is in regard to transitions, graceful transitions to the neighborhood. So these 2-story townhomes are similar in height to the residential to the north and the east, provides a better transition from the single-family neighborhood to the more intense commercial uses, as opposed to what was there, the gas station and the hair salon. The project is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Again, neighborhood node talks about small-scale residential development. Primary uses include residential. The density on this site is 15 units an acre. The small area plan suggests between 12 and 30 units an acre. So again, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. What's unique about the PUD zoning is the project that was approved for the site is the only thing that can be built without having to come back before the Planning Commission and City Council. So the PUD builds in that extra protection. So this is a look at the ordinance itself. Again, it's establishing a specific zoning district for this site. The approved plans from last September are the only thing that can be built there. There were variances associated with the project, so those are also built into the ordinance. So again, this is the development that the property owner intends to build on the site. We didn't receive any feedback on the Better Together. The staff recommendation this evening is for approval. Recommend that the City Council approve the rezoning subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in the staff report. With that, I can stop for questions.
Questions, anyone? Yep, Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Director Teague, for the presentation. Just a couple questions. The first one is just around the concern. There's the concern that if this stays as a commercial area, PCD1, that there would be parking required for the site? And is that the only concern, or were there other concerns?
Yeah, I think just concern with the commercial use itself. Parking was one of the issues that was raised. I think there's concern about parking on the street with commercial, should the site be turned commercial.
Okay. One other question with regards to that. It was a gas station before, and it also was a hair salon. Was there any concerns with parking when it was used for those purposes at all?
Not that I'm aware of. There was a pretty good-sized parking lot associated with the hair salon. I'm not aware of any complaints that the city received in terms of parking on Oak Lawn. There was some extra parking available. This site, this is an older aerial. You can see there was some parking built in along Kellogg. If customers parked over there, that might have occurred back then.
Gotcha. Just one last question then. So if this were to be, we build these apartments, and then these apartments, someone buys it and converts it back to a commercial area, then they'll be required to put parking according to the parking ordinance on this site. That might require creating parking lots underground, et cetera, to the site. So it'd be up to the new developer to figure out what parking requirements would be needed and to
That's
make that
correct.
happen.
So in addition to providing the required parking, it would then, should the property be rezoned to PUD, they'd need a rezoning to allow that commercial use.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Strauss?
Yes, thank you. Director Teague, just to review, just so, to simplify for myself here, basically what we're looking at is a project that was approved.
Correct.
And to protect say, the city's long-term interest under the direction and advice of the city attorney, the process is to rezone this to. I mean, that's basically, we're not looking at any change of the use of this site than what we've already reviewed and approved, and it's just really under advice to fully complete this. Is that a fair summary of?
Yes, yep, that's a fair assessment. This rezoning would prohibit any type of commercial use. The site received a conditional use permit for the multi-residential, but the code would still allow commercial if it remained PCD 1.
Okay. And I think it was clearly covered that any of those concerns will and can be addressed, through any possible suggestion of a commercial use. So, okay,
Right.
Thank you. That's good.
Commissioner Day?
It's just a quick question about the order of operations here in terms of the zoning. So, and this could be a dumb question, but why was the PUD not part of the original request, and why is it now? Why all of a sudden was this commercial development, did it become a concern, I guess, after the fact? That's my question.
That's an excellent question. So this goes back to 2017 when this site was included as part of the Edina Flats development. When that project came before the Planning Commission and City Council, we talked a little bit about the zoning and what should the appropriate zoning be. Should it be PUD? Should it be remain planned commercial district? The feeling and direction at that time from the City Council was the zoning allows that type of use. We don't need to do a PUD for every development. So the direction that was given to the developer at that time was to maintain the existing zoning and just issue a conditional use permit for the use.
Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Smith.
So Director Tiga, just a question on missing middle. How would you define missing middle? I have my thoughts on what I think missing middle is, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on what a missing middle is.
Yeah, it's a density somewhere in between a single-family home and an apartment building. I see it as row-type housing, similar to this. The development over on Hankerson that went in a couple of years ago, I would define that as missing middle. There's a perception that missing middle is associated with affordable housing, not necessarily, especially you look at those Hankerson townhomes, those are well above affordable housing. It's a potential way to provide affordable housing by smaller lots. They may not be as expensive, but not necessarily considered affordable.
All right, I got a question for you. So, kind of to take on to Commissioner Day's question, the concern that was brought up, was this by the City Council during their approval of the subdivision or following that?
It was some of the feedback that we got on Better Together and the testimony that was given.
During the subdivision request?
Yes.
But the subdivision was granted?
The subdivision has not been granted yet. They tabled that for this process to move forward. And the idea is for this all to come to the City Council next week for a decision on the rezoning and the subdivision.
Oh, my. Okay, so, we all got this letter, and I can't help but agree with this person's concern. I'm putting myself in the shoes of the developer here. I mean, they've gone through something that is approved all over Edina with conditional use permits. Where this letter is incorrect is multi-residential use is permitted by conditional use in a PCD1.
Correct.
So, I mean, how this went through the process was legit and is literally next door to this and is in other areas. Just to be in the shoes of the developer to get go through this and then have to go through it all again. I'm struggling to see the concern of granting a conditional use permit for a future use that might be different than this, while other sites nearby still have that conditional use permit in place with the PCD1. This developer is obviously investing a lot of money to do this plan, and I'm just struggling to see what concern came up, and this kind of goes to our development review process conversation later. That concern was not brought up to us before our approval of the subdivision request, as far as I recall. Is that true?
I believe there were some comments in Better Together. When those exactly came in, I don't recall off the top of my head.
I'm just concerned we're starting an arbitrary precedent that's running people around when we already have a process that works and was guided for the developers. So I don't understand why we would support doing a PUD here for such a small site as a way to protect a potential that, I mean, this is a commercial area. If something were to change 50 years from now, so be it. They'd have to provide parking. They'd have to come before the planning commission anyways. So I just don't see why this is a necessary step at all. And it's just part of the process. I kind of feel bad for whoever's trying to work with us in the city. I just don't see where there's guidelines that we should support this. And I'd like to hear other commissioners' perspective. Yeah, Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Director Teague, for your presentation. I was surprised when I got the packet and then I was like, haven't we approved this already? So I understand the caution of the city attorney and the city council, but it seems so late in the process to be tackling this. I mean, if it means getting the project over the goal line and done and accomplished next week, fine, I'll approve it. But it does seem that for such a small site, like Chair Bennett was saying, and other projects have already been, and I know you're only working from the direction of the city council, so it just seems a little clunky, and kind of empathize with the developer too, who probably thought she was well on her way, and now here we are again. So it kind of, again, echoing what Jimmy said about the development review process and what we'll be talking about later. This, I think, is probably a timely thing for this to come up, because we'll be taught this is a good example of kind of why it's a little needs to be fixed.
Any other questions? Sorry. Yeah, Commissioner Smith.
Questions. So if this were to be subdivided into, I guess, maybe 4 sections, is there any issues if this were to be converted into a commercial district in the future? The future developer would just need to buy the individual subdivisions as necessary for the commercial property. Is there any concern at all with subdividing now and then commercializing later?
Well, by rezoning the site for only residential uses, it kind of takes that potential away. They couldn't turn this into a commercial lot without it would take a rezoning, review and approval by Planning Commission and City Council, and they would have to meet all of those provisions, parking, setbacks, those types of things. So the rezoning to this residential-only use kind of takes care of that argument in the future for if someone wanted to turn one of those units into a commercial property. They couldn't without that rezoning.
Okay.
But then again, they couldn't really anyway, unless they met our parking regulations. There's going to be a townhome association with this project. All 4 units would probably have to buy in.
Commissioner Padilla.
Okay, thank you. To kind of follow up on that point, so if somebody purchased one of the units and lived in it and ran a business out of it, would this preclude, the rezoning preclude them from having a business in there where they saw clients?
Yes.
Even if it was just
as a primary use, that's correct.
Okay, and then a second question I had was back, and I apologize, I don't remember when we first looked at this. What kind of feedback did we get from Better Together initially? Do you recall that, or does anybody recall? Was there concern amongst the community, in the community input initially about this issue?
Yeah, there were some opposition when this project went through and was approved, the one that you're seeing on the screen. There was feedback that the lots were too small, concern about lot size and the commercial use. Those were the two primary ones that stick out for me.
Thank you.
Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, no, I know sometimes we use PUD to get in things like affordable housing, but this is too small to be worried about that, right? This isn't going to contribute anything to affordable housing?
That's correct.
Okay. And then we have, because we're jumping right to PUD, but we have low-density residential, right? Would that not be an appropriate fit for this lot?
It would be a little more complicated in that you're going to rezone to a different district. They have different setbacks. We've already established the setbacks, so with a PUD ordinance, we can write those setbacks that have already been established with that variance process.
Would these be significantly different than?
They would be exactly the same.
Okay. So, because I'm just trying to think, I guess, because, the chair mentioned precedent. It's like, if we're going to fix this, I think that's a good point that, we should figure out, okay, how do we want to do this in the future, as opposed to let's do this quick little, PUD thing right now.
I guess one last question to tie into Commissioner Smith's. So again, if this is subdivided, potentially and likely each of these lots will be owned individually by someone else, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then the likelihood of this whole thing becoming something commercial is arguably a lot lower of a chance. Okay.
I would agree.
All right, that's all for me. Anyone else? Welcome the developer applicant to the podium to share presentation or their thoughts or anything.
Hi, Rebecca Remick, owner of City Homes. Nice to see you all again. Just want to echo everything that Kerry said. He did a great job. I think I am here, and Mr. Bennett, you are correct in the amount of time and money, and I'm trying to do everything that I can by what people are telling me to do. I have done everything that I said I would do. The intended purpose of these is residential row homes with the approved project by the City Council, and I have agreed to do the rezoning that was asked of me by Kerry and the City Attorney, and I hope that we can make that happen, and by the time road restrictions are done and I have a permit, I could actually start building on this site and for once and for all have a complete entry into Pamela Park as I promised I would. So, thank you. Any questions?
Any questions? Commissioner Felt.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to hear from you. So, because I'm new on the commission, so these plans stay the same. You're here today just because the city asked for this all to be zoned residential. Is that correct?
I have not changed one thing since approval.
Okay, so they're exactly like the way they were.
Exactly the same.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now open this for public hearing. Okay. So we will allow people who are here in person to testify first for public hearing, and then we'll move to the remote. For those that are calling in or would like to, again, the number is 786-496-5601, and enter conference pin 864-2813#, and then we'll let you know when to hit *1 to get in the queue to speak. But first, we'll allow anyone who's here to speak on this matter. We'll give you 3 minutes. Please come to the podium, state your full name and address. The green light will go on. When it turns amber, you have 30 seconds. When it's red, your time's up. We'll let you know. But if anyone is here, please come to the podium to speak. Thank you. And you may begin. Hopefully the mic is working. Yeah, we can see it on the screen. So just full name and address, please.
Okay. Janie Weston, 6136 Brookview Avenue. I lived directly across the street on the corner of Oak Lawn and directly east of this property. So I understand it very, very well. I now live just east of it. This request to rezone to a planned unit development, PUD, is completely inappropriate and an outright misuse of how a PUD is to be used. In researching what other metro area suburban cities have in their PUD ordinances and procedures, this inappropriateness became abundantly clear. The cities that I researched are Richfield, Golden Valley, Anoka, Roseville, Brooklyn Park, Hopkins, and Minnetonka. In all of these cities, their codes clearly and unambiguously state that rezoning to PUD is a first step in the process, or it is a part of the process in combination with planning a development from the very beginning. I gave you an overview of all these different municipalities and my general findings that may be very helpful for your decision tonight. They often have a minimum of acreage, 2 to 10 acres. This lot for the former Burley site is 0.27 acres, barely over a quarter. In a document that was written by the Community Resource Planning for the state of Minnesota in 2000 and updated in 2008, titled From Policy to Reality, Model Ordinances for Sustainable Development, PUD, it is stated on page 5, the minimum lot size no less than 10 acres. In the same state of Minnesota document on page 4, under limitations of PUDs, it reads, the PUD must not become a way to simply circumvent zoning and subdivision standards. As you can see, the request to rezone it from Planned Commercial District, PCD1, to PUD, and I correct myself, it's 6 months after the plans were already approved, is not appropriate. This request is beyond belief in my book. The PUD process, procedure application, is to be done at the beginning of a process. It was not. The City Homes people have been misguided here. They were not properly guided on this. PUD is not correct. I give a number of bullet points for what's in the city code that are not okay. They do not fit the purpose and intent of a PUD. And finally, another important question. The View 44 apartments in the previous City Homes condo buildings are still PCD1. There's nothing that can stop any one of those units from being used for commercial purposes on the first floor. PCD1 prohibits residential use at basement level and ground floor. Why are they still PCD1? The Normandy apartments are PRD, residential development. So are other apartment buildings down Valley View. So
just please wrap up.
Why? How did this happen? Please do not misuse the PUD in this case. This is not proper, not appropriate.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who is here in person that'd like to testify at the public hearing here? Thank you. I think you know the drill.
Yes. Hi, Steve Brown, 5528 Halifax Lane. I just have a question, which would be, one concern that has been expressed is that investors are purchasing single-family homes and then renting them out. And I'm curious whether if someone were to do that with this townhome situation, whether that would be considered a commercial use. So one application of this request tonight would be to prevent that from happening. And that, I think, would be a desirable outcome. But on the other hand, if you didn't do it because of the concerns that have just been raised, would that be an acceptable use under the current zoning? So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who is here in person that'd like to testify? Seeing no one eager to get up there, we'll turn it over to those who called in. Do we have anyone in the queue? If you are, please, if you're in the waiting room, please push *1 to get in the queue. Is anyone there?
Yes, so we do have someone in the waiting room, but they have not signaled *1 yet to speak. So I would recommend, oh, it looks like they might have just signaled here. Operator, can you please unmute their line?
Again, please state your, well, there's a delay here, right?
There shouldn't be, no.
Okay, yeah, so please state your full name and address, and you got 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. This is Connie Carino, 4509 Garrison Lane. I'm a resident and a member of the Wooddale Valley View Small Area Plan Work Group. When I served on that work group, I did so because I do support thoughtful redevelopment that meets a community vision. This proposal and project, and now the process, has been disappointing to say the least from the get-go. Not only did this Planning Commission and City Council approve a project that does not align with the small area plan, but it stuffs 4 townhomes onto a 0.27 acre lot where one single-story residential-looking business once stood. The SAP work group and area stakeholders spent a great deal of time focusing on this particular parcel in hopes of avoiding this type of project that will forever change a neighborhood node. After the out-of-character project was approved, we, the neighbors, were informed the project required subdividing the connected structures on the 0.27 acre parcel into even smaller lots. At the time, I was puzzled by this process. Shouldn't the community be alerted at the time of the project approval that the mini acreage would also require subdividing? I submitted those types of process-related questions to Better Together. I trust those questions were provided in your packets. So now this, rezoning after the fact for a project that is not code compliant, that technically never should have been approved, and that goes against community vision. I am not only confused by the process, but concerned by the precedent this sets for future one-off decision-making, where a mistake in project approval can swiftly and creatively be corrected with PUD. But I really want to clarify here that my comments in this statement are not directed at any individuals, whether the developer or commissioners or council. It is the ambiguous and often confusing process that is concerning and that this particular project brings to the forefront. This proposed PUD is being presented as a simple solution. It seems to me that instead of rushing tonight to fix a wrong with a PUD Band-Aid, that this commission should recommend staff and the council look at how to fix and improve the process. Generally speaking, most residents, me included, want to trust in our city government and its decisions. But that means we need to have clear, understandable processes that in turn align with the community vision. I encourage you to use this opportunity to correct and clarify what has become a very muddy process. Approving a PUD for this project only makes matters worse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else in the queue or waiting room ready to speak?
We do not have anyone else in the queue, so I believe it is safe to proceed.
Okay, welcome a motion to close the public hearing tonight.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So moved. All right, as discussed, we will bring this back to the Planning Commission right now to deliberate. So this is your chance to share comments. If you have further questions for staff or the developer, here we go. Commissioner Day.
First question for me is for Director Teague, and the question that was brought up by the second commentator about the concern about developers buying the properties and turning them in and renting them out. Would us rezoning to PUD from PCD1 prevent that? And I just want to, get that clarification for everybody.
It would not preclude them from renting the space for residential uses. They could not rent for a commercial use.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Olson.
This is for you, Director Teague. So I'm confused because, like I said earlier, my goal is to get this project. I feel so bad for the developer that we're getting comments about why we even approved it when we're 90% of the way there. So I feel like the council has put us in a position where if we want to say no to the PUD zoning, what happens to the project?
They still have a conditional use permit to build the property, and they have a site plan review with variances, so they could still build this project. The reason they were asking for the subdivision is so that each unit could be sold separately. So that was why they came back after the project was approved for the subdivision. That's not an uncommon process, especially for row homes or condominiums. Oftentimes, they wait until the structures are built and then they come in for a subdivision where they're creating lot lines around the structure themselves. So in order to create those legal descriptions, the building has to be constructed. So there's really, as was mentioned by the applicant, no changes to the plans. This was coming in late because they wanted to sell the individual units and do the subdivision.
Again, any comments, questions that were in this year? Commissioner Miranda. Sorry.
So when Commissioner Teague, or Planner Teague, Director Teague, when we get requests to split lots for this sort of thing, I mean, are they usually zoned duplex, single family, or, what are they usually zoned that we're splitting them?
Yeah, most of the subdivisions that we receive are for single-family homes. Occasionally, we get a duplex split where they're creating a party wall that separates the units.
So typically when we get a PUD, it's a large project and it's one piece of property that's zoned PUD for the whole thing, right?
Correct.
Would this is kind of an anomaly in terms of PUD that we have 4 teeny tiny little lots, right?
It is in regard to this being owner-occupied. Most of the PUDs that we do, they're apartments. Right. So there's not a subdivision associated with it.
And then one final question. So the thing about PUDs that differs from other kinds of zoning that we have is that each one is unique, right? So, for example, if we change our ordinances for single-family home zoning or for duplex zoning or whatever, and we say, okay, for duplex zoning, we're changing the setback requirement, adding 2 feet, subtracting 2 feet, whatever. So that applies to every zoned property with that zoning designation.
Correct.
But it won't apply to this, right? Because this is its own special little thing.
That is correct.
Okay. And that seems a little odd to me. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Padilla.
Just my comments. First of all, I would like to say to the people who spoke, I appreciate everything that you said, the questions that you asked, the comments that you made. You were heard. I want to make sure that you know that, and your thoughts and questions considered. The fact that this has already been approved, and that a change in this, whether or not the zoning will change or changes, will not preclude it from being built and finished, makes me loath to want to change approve the change in zoning. I also think that it sets precedent, as was mentioned earlier, and it precludes creative types of businesses that people might have in their homes that are the wave of the future from happening, and I'm not interested in seeing that, so I'm not in favor of this.
If I could respond to that. So,
Sure.
while the primary use would be residential, someone could have a home office in there. They could run a customary home occupation. But the primary use of the site, someone has to live there.
Okay, so that goes to the question that I asked earlier. So as long as somebody is living there, they can have a business?
Well, we have home occupation rules, such as, I don't have it in front of me, but limiting the number of people that can come to the site, parking. So just like a single-family home could run a home office out of their site. They just can't have customers coming to the site, but they're doing the office-type work out of the home.
Okay, thanks.
Just wanted to interject with a question, maybe direction on this. So what we're doing tonight is providing a recommendation to the city council. What we're doing is not a binding decision. So technically, we could recommend denial of this and recommend instead, or have a recommendation for the city council to approve the subdivision as we have already approved based off of a set of conditions we can identify and come up with tonight. And technically, at their next meeting, they could approve that, correct?
They could. That will be on the agenda as well.
So it wouldn't slow them down, and it still could get the developer to, and ultimately it's up to the city council anyways to decide this, but just food for thought. We don't have to arbitrarily approve this PUD because it wouldn't slow them down technically.
Yep, because the argument can be made that under the PCD1 zoning district, multi-residential use is a conditionally permitted use, and they have a conditional use permit.
So I guess one stipulation that was brought up to that was residential couldn't be a part of the bottom or ground level. Is that without a conditional use permit in a PCD1?
That is a separate regulation. That is true.
So the conditional use permit is on top of that and can allow residential to be any level, any amount.
That's the interpretation, yes, that conditional use permit allowed housing on the first level.
Okay.
The rezoning takes away that argument about commercial being required on the first level.
Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, this is an interesting issue before us. I still struggle to understand the value of rezoning this to PUD. Besides the parking issue, rezoning would still move forward. We could still develop on this property. It has already been approved. I just don't see how allowing this changes anything other than reducing the options available on this site, taking away that commercial use opportunity. I think when we got the presentation, part of that presentation was we could have changes in use based on market. By us putting a PUD in place, it really cuts off that commercial side of the market in this area. I think and I'm not sure, but certainly clarify, but it might also reduce the size of the node if we were to remove any kind of commercialization here. One business opportunity that I could think of that might fit here is like a in-home psychiatrist. They could run their business out of this spot. It doesn't have a huge flood of clients, and I would probably work in this spot. But if we think about the entire process, so I'm not super in favor of changing the zoning because I just don't see how it adds anything. It seems like we have to really figure out the process from the beginning and how do we start this thing off on the right foot to get it through so the developer could move forward, start working on it, and not come back later to now say, hey, don't forget, you got to change this to PUD now. Where did that come from? What's the value here? So my question to the team is, what should the process have looked like if this had run smoothly? What would be the steps we'd have to go through from the beginning so we could avoid having to come up with these new zoning requirements later?
So I guess to further that, similar in nature, the Vernon townhomes, those were a medium density residential zoning, right? It was rezoned to that?
The ones over on Hankerson?
Yeah.
That was rezoned to PUD.
It was PUD.
But it was a medium density, correct?
Yeah, okay. And I guess to continue that question, I'm looking to you for an answer. I mean, this is a typical process that the applicant was guided toward that has happened elsewhere, correct? I mean, if we were to redo this and do it a different way, would we recommend something differently? Or, I mean, this process has happened fine before,
yeah,
correct?
I think the option would have been back in 2017 when we were looking at the Edina Flats as a whole. We could have done PUD at that time. But that wasn't the direction or the choice that the applicant made at that time. Another way, we could have requested the subdivision during that site plan review with variances, and we wouldn't be here.
Commissioner Bornstein?
Yeah, and is the reason, was the desire to sell the individual units not present at that time?
It was present at that time.
Okay.
But we didn't do the subdivision. Like I've mentioned before, it's not uncommon to come back after a project is approved to establish the lot lines around each individual unit, and then there's a common space area. So, it wasn't required at that time.
Commissioner Felt?
So in essence, we're asking them to go through that process now so they can be sold individually rather than after they're built and then sold individually.
They couldn't be sold individually until the property is subdivided. They could be built, but they would be held in common ownership.
And to be clear, that is different than what is before us now, because we already we already recommended approval for a subdivision. So this just seems, everyone knows where I stand here. Yeah, Commissioner Day.
So I find it, I guess, a bit interesting that we're discussing a topic like this on a meeting that our same agenda has simplification of our review process, right? In terms of, we zoned it, now we're coming back and retreading a process that's already been, or a development that's already been approved, and now saying we should rezone this. And to me, it sets a bad precedent of confusion for our residents, right? Of saying this isn't a clear process. Why are we coming back to this now? I didn't understand it from the beginning, right? We're setting to come back and say it's not really. To me, it's not necessary for us to rezone this to a PUD. Right, we can accomplish what we need to accomplish with the current zoning. It's been approved. I think that should have been the end of it. To come back now is really, I think we've seen a bit of the frustration from the residents around there with the process, and to say, it's confusing, right? And I can see this becoming more of an issue if we say, yeah, let's approve the PUD, and then how many more developments will have to come back and say we would like a PUD, where even though we already have been granted our permission, right? We're going to come back and do it again, and city government will move even slower than it currently does. So yeah, that's, I guess, a bit of a dialogue, but that's kind of my thoughts.
I would agree. We don't want to repeat this process again. To be clear, the rezoning accomplishes that protection about future uses and that ambiguity about commercial uses required on the first floor.
So I guess, according to the staff report, you guys do not have recommendations in their provisions for denial, right? Or did
That's correct.
Okay. So, I mean, I could offer a couple right now just for food for thought. The approved use conforms to the current zoning. The approved project conforms to the small area plan, arguably. It does. Neighborhood node for the zone calls for residential up to 30 units per acre. It sets a bad precedent for the civic process that's already established and followed elsewhere nearby. So those are certain conditions for denial I feel are appropriate. If others have different ones, that's just to tee up if someone's willing to deny this. With a recommendation on top of that, I'd support is to approve the subdivision as already recommended by the Planning Commission and not slow this process down any further for the applicant.
So I can take that and motion to deny the request to zone to PUD, the recommendation that the subdivision be approved or be recommended for approval going forward.
Let's go through those findings so we're clear, if you don't mind. So the use conforms to the existing zoning of planned commercial district. The use conforms to the comprehensive plan in terms of use and density.
Approved project.
Approved project.
Yeah, it conforms to the small area plan and essentially the comprehensive plan. I think it's important to note the precedent it sets. I mean, it sets a bad precedent for a civic process already established to go in a way that's not guided. I don't know how we articulate that differently. We do have a lawyer here.
Not in this area, but yeah.
Any other comments or additions? Or a second?
So, well, just a clarification. Before they'll sell them, they'll have to come back. Is that, or they won't have to come back?
They will go before the city council next week with the request for the rezoning and the subdivision. So the subdivision is a separate action from the rezoning.
Okay.
Second, the motion.
Let's do a roll call vote here.
Could I?
Oh, yeah, on further discussion, sorry. Yep.
Could I have a restatement of the motion?
So the motion was to deny the PUD rezoning request with the recommendation that City Council approve the subdivision request, if I'm stating that correctly, along with the findings that Commissioner listed off, and I guess that Director Teague listed off. And I don't think, was there anything else additional to that? I don't believe so. Okay, so that was.
So voting yes is denying.
With a recommendation to approve the subdivision.
Okay. Okay. Let me make sure.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Miranda.
Aye.
Commissioner Felt.
Aye.
Commissioner Padilla.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Day.
Aye.
Commissioner Strauss.
Aye.
Commissioner Bornstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Aye.
Chair Bennett.
Aye. So the proposal is denied as it states, and will go before the City Council. We wish you the best of luck. We want your project to happen, but let's just get the process right. Thank you. All right, thank you guys. That's not a That's not common. All right, next, I know we had the first report and recommendation is Resolution B 2304, findings regarding the proposed 72nd and France 2 TIF district. And tonight we have Economic Development Manager Bill Neuendorf himself here to present. Turn it over to you, Bill. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. Let's see. All right, there we go. Technology. Great. Good evening. Bill Neuendorf with the City of Edina. I'm the city's Economic Development Manager. This next item on your agenda is in regards to the proposal to create a new tax increment financing district. And the item before you is seeking your opinion based on the compliance of the project that's part of that TIF plan with the overall comprehensive plan. So just to be clear, the whole decision about whether or not tax increment financing is used and what it's used for and how it's used, that's strictly a city council decision. But the topic in front of you this evening is about the land use related to that proposal. So I've got a very brief background presentation that summarizes the project, summarizes our findings, and then seeks your support. So I'll walk through that quickly. The site itself is at 7200 to 7250 France Avenue. For those of you that have been on the commission for a few months or a few years, you've heard this one talked about quite a bit. This slide shows the layout of the approved project that was granted PUD rezoning, recommended for approval by this body last fall, back in September, and finally working through the process, getting full city council approval in February of this year. Splits the 5-acre site in two pieces with 2 commercial buildings, a lot of common space, shared underground parking, and some stormwater retention areas. A 3-dimensional rendering of that approved project. This slide is a lot of information, and I really want to highlight the 2 areas where this group gets involved. Anytime the city considers the use of tax increment financing, there's a number of steps that are required to be considered. The step tonight is highlighted here in yellow, and that's to seek your affirmation that the scope of the project, what will actually be built, is in accordance with a comprehensive plan and our land use controls. Further down the road, we'll go to the HRA, we'll go to the city council, the schools, the county, et cetera. But tonight is a brief stop for your opinion. The TIF plan is in your packet. It's about 80 pages or so. I would call your attention to Appendix E of that TIF plan, which calls out what will be built in this area. And you will notice that the image that's shown on the right here looks exactly like the image of what was approved to be built with your recommendation last year and then with the city council approval last month. So to be clear, the intended outcome of this TIF district is to build the plan that was approved by this body and by city council. The report does have a number of findings to ensure and to document compliance with the city's plans regarding this area. I always include a slide about the Southeast Redevelopment Project Area and Plan. That's really an old document, but it still has life. It guides the HRA, the city's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. So we definitely comply with that. I think most importantly for this body, it's the comprehensive plan. The site in question is highlighted in the yellow circle, guided for office residential. And in the comprehensive plan, there's a number of goals identified that this project aligns very clearly with. If you go back and look at your findings when you recommended support of this project, you'll find reference to most of those goals. We also looked at the Greater Southdale District Plan to really focus on some of the public realm outcomes there from subdivision of the large site, creating new public spaces, new public trails, streets, et cetera, and found that those findings are also in alignment with this proposal. So in summary, based on these findings, staff does recommend that Resolution B23-04 be approved, and that resolution confirms that this proposed TIF plan does conform with the city's comprehensive plan. We would take this recommendation, advance it to the next step in the process, which is a public hearing to the City Council, and then final consideration next month. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Turn it over to any commissioners with questions. Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Thank you. My question is about the timing of the TIF request, or what the process. Having approved a project, so I understand sort of our role here, but my personal philosophy on how to use TIF, if I had known TIF was part of this project when approving the first plan, I think I would have made some different decisions regarding the public benefit. The but for there isn't strong enough for me. So can you explain to me a little bit of the process when the deciding and approving a sketch plan and a design and how it relates to the TIF?
Sure. There's not a perfectly correct time nor a perfectly wrong time to marry up the land use approvals and the financing approvals. But we're always cautious that when questions of land use come before this board, they're based on land use code, not on financing, not on whether it's privately financed, equity financed, debt financed, or publicly financed, but really focusing on those land use controls. So with this particular project, we've been having on and off conversations with this developer, the previous developers, the other previous developers, about the challenges of this project, of this site. It's a very tough site. It serves as a stormwater retention basin for pretty much the whole neighborhood. So not only do they have to solve their problem, they have to solve other neighbors' problems, and that gets expensive. So it's been well known, I believe. In fact, there's an existing TIF district on this property that coincided with the previous plan. Unfortunately, with that project, even with the use of TIF, they still could not get financing for it and eventually sold it. So that's a little bit about the history and where we are today.
Great question, great answer. Any others? Yeah, Commissioner Padilla first, sorry.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to make sure, I feel like we simultaneously have a bunch of balls in the air here. So originally when we talked about this, or I won't say originally, last time we talked about this, this was going to be an office, correct? Now we're looking at hotel and the same, or it's going to be apartment, now it's a hotel.
I wonder if Carrie can better weigh in than I can.
I can chime in. When the Planning Commission looked at this, it was an office at 7250, as shown on the screen there, with a coffee shop. That is the plan still for that site. The 7200 site was a little more up in the air. At that time, when the Planning Commission considered it, it was thought to be an apartment, 150 units with 10,000 square feet of retail. There was always, they'd mentioned the possibility of hospitality, but there was no specific approval for the use of that site. So that's the sketch plan that's next on your agenda.
That's what I mean about the simultaneous.
Yeah.
And at the same time, at our next meeting in 2 weeks, we're going to hear about the property across the street. So, and this is all done kind of independently. So I know you just want to talk about TIF. Does that have any bearing on whatever happens across the street, or the fact, or whether the use of this property?
I don't believe so. The two properties are owned by different entities, different parties, working on different time frames, different buyers, different sellers. So the only commonality is they're across the street from each other.
But the TIF financing aspect doesn't have it. It doesn't matter whether it's a hotel or an office. Or at one point I believe we were talking about a grocery store too, right? that's irrelevant.
That's irrelevant. So there's been lots of conversation about this site. For the city council, I had a slide that had, I think, the 8 different proposals for this site that have all failed over the last several years. What we're talking about now is what has been approved. So the office building on the southern parcel, and then the hotel or apartment. It could go either way per the approved zoning. So we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. So in the TIF plan, we have also written it that the image that's on the screen with a box for the 7,200, that would either be the hotel or the apartment, whichever makes the most sense at the time. Both align with the approved zoning. And right now the developer is exploring the hotel. They think that makes a lot of sense, but they still have to get site plan approval for that. But they have the zoning approval, and that's what's critical here for this decision.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Felt?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So the TIF is providing them with tax benefits, and we justify that by saying that there are things here for the public good. And I see a lot of those at the road to the north-south and the east-west corridor. I see that, but I did read in there that that road is considered private. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking, but correct me if I'm wrong. So with the approved site plan, and in fact through the Greater Southdale Guide, it calls for continuous north-south access to the site, something that does not exist today. So for example, if you're in one building, they're both torn down, but when they were both there, to go from one building to the next, you'd have to get in your car, drive up the hill, drive to France Avenue, wait at that stoplight, go down a block, wait at that stoplight, make another right, and enter the other property. It adds cars unnecessarily to the street. So one of the goals here was to make these two properties work together, whereas they were built separately intentionally back in the late 60s. So that's where the roadway concept came from. There was a lot of conversation also about non-motorized vehicles. So through this body, the recommendation was to split out the pathway rather than including it on the street, make that separate. So that was included. Part of the preference when the city uses tax increment financing is, while our plans call for roads and paths on the site, it's not in the city's budget to build these. It's not in the city's budget to maintain them. So that's where tax increment financing can be helpful. So the developer will build the road, they'll plow the road, they'll fix the potholes in the road, and the city will have a permanent public easement to use the road at no cost. So it adds to our infrastructure without adding to our maintenance burden for the future.
One follow-up to that. So we'll have a permanent public easement, and that will go with the property, and that easement will transfer from.
Correct. Yeah, the easement, just like any legal easement, it runs with the land. So we'll have easements for the road, for the north-south road. We'll have easements for the north-south trail. We'll have easements for the 2 overlook areas that overlook the stormwater basin and the natural area to the south. We'll have easements for that plaza in the center. We'll have easements for the sidewalks on 72nd, Gallagher, and France Avenue. We'll have easements for the green space in front of the buildings along France Avenue. I think that's it, but that's a lot. Over 51% of the site is covered by a permanent public easement that the public gets to use and the developer has to maintain.
Is the developer here tonight too? I just wanted to ask, either I'll ask you the question or I'll wait for the developer.
They are not part of this discussion.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, questions regarding the development itself should be tabled later. This is specific to the land use and creation of the TIF district.
All right.
Any other questions? Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Bill. So just a question / comment, I guess. So if I understand correctly, what we on the Planning Commission are asked to do is there anything that we would recommend land use wise for this development now that we know it requires public financing? If I'm understanding that correctly. And I know the city council, et cetera, would decide on TIF financing and everything like that. But one thing that I thought of was, as we're going through sketch plan review, and we recommend adding a street, doing a WUNRF, all these different things, I'm wondering at what point in our recommendations and the redesigns, did it tip the scale at some point during that conversation where TIF financing was now necessary? Or from the get-go, with all the developers that we've talked with on developing the site, that TIF financing was something that had to be considered from day one?
I don't know if I have a solid answer for that.
I could jump in and give it a shot here.
Yeah.
The TIF consideration, that is a decision of the City Council. The Planning Commission is only asked to consider the land use aspects. When we were considering this development and that 51% being dedicated to the public in easement, that was a significant justification for the PUD. That was the land use decision. Who pays for it? That's a decision of the City Council. So we need to just stick to the land use piece of it.
Gotcha. I was just trying to connect the dots between decisions that we make on the Planning Commission, how much that affects the financing decision. But maybe that's a different conversation that we could talk about. I thought we did a pretty good job the last time about the design, what we wanted, and all the different aspects. So I feel like this development meets the needs of the comprehensive plan, meets the needs of the city. Unless I hear something differently, I thought it was a pretty good end product that we were able to come up with. So,
any other questions?
Just a general question
perfect.
Just for information. You had said that there was multiple other developments proposed at the same site over the years and that they had failed. Just curious why they failed. Was it just financing? Was it inappropriate use of the land? Or why did they not proceed when this one did? That's just a general information question.
Yeah, and I don't remember each one. Each one had a different story, of course. Some proposals were far too dense and didn't make it. They were rejected, denied. Others tried to redevelop the parcels separately, so at different times by different owners, which left us in the same situation where they don't communicate with each other. So those didn't get approved. Another one was submitted, it was massive, and it was withdrawn the next day I don't know what happened with that one, but that didn't get approved either. The one that did get approved in 2019, there were a number of conditions placed on it, whether they were by the Planning Commission or City Council. I honestly don't recall who added those particular issues, but I know they drove up the cost, drove down the rent, and that certainly contributed to the inability to finance that one. Yeah.
Thanks. Just wanted, that background for future use. Thanks.
Helpful. Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, so I struggle with this whole easement thing. Because if you look at a city, I mean, you know, we don't have easements on the streets in front of our houses or apartments or whatever. The city owns those. And having this huge area of the city where the city doesn't own these, I mean, I'm trying to think of issues where that comes up, where we're giving tax increment financing for something that is being built a certain way today, but there's no guarantee, because we don't own it, there's no guarantee that it's going to be maintained the way we want it to be maintained, or that it could be replaced with something else, or, I mean, we completely lose control other than having physical access to that space. So, I mean, I'm having concerns about that. So, for example, you know, what if 20 years from now the road surface is bad and they replace it with a much wider street that we wouldn't want, right? Do speed limits apply on these private streets? You know, the city already reduced the speed limits to 25 citywide. What if the city had guarantees that bikeways would be plowed within 24 hours, the way some places like Northern Europe have? I mean, it's these sort of things that, you know, make me worry about having easements instead of the city owning the land. And I know we save money because we don't have to plow it and pave it or whatever, but we also lose control, which I think is the whole point of a public street. So, and then this is going to stay as one property. Will there be an opportunity to subdivide this at all?
It's already subdivided into two pieces.
Okay.
So two separate parcel IDs. So I believe that will remain that way.
Okay. All right. Anyway, thank you.
If I could respond to one of your statements. So how the city, I hear your concerns about loss of control. What binds the developer to follow through with their pledge is the legally binding public easement that requires whatever the width of the roadway is. For example, if it's 24 feet, they're required to keep a 24-foot roadway in the condition that was approved in these approved plans in good condition. So if it's marred with potholes and they come in and it's, you know, they just try to do something completely differently, we have a binding legal contract that says they can't do that. So we still have control that way, but we don't have that maintenance obligation.
Thank you.
I have one question. You know, often, in whether TIF is a philosophy in Edina, that's, you know, it comes up later and it's hard to support sometimes, but makes sense here. But other TIF districts include multiple parcels or they grow incrementally. Can you speak to the potential future of this site and this TIF district and what limitations or opportunities there are with it, if there are any? Or will this stay TIF District 2 by itself?
I can't speak to the future or what could possibly change, but the proposal tonight is to create a TIF district on these two parcels and these two parcels alone. We did expand the boundaries to include the sidewalks and streets. So if there's crosswalks that need to be improved to serve the site, we would include those as well. But at this point, there's no intention, no discussion about expanding the district, the size of it, or anything of that nature. I suppose that theoretically that's possible. We'd have to start from scratch and go back to square one and do public hearings all over again to make any changes to that district. But at this point, for the foreseeable future, the TIF district is these two parcels.
So I guess just informationally similar to Commissioner Day's question, like the Grandview district had, right, multiple parcels, and then there was a distance between those or away from those that we could use it for improving infrastructure. What are the conditions for this site? I mean, is it similar reach, or is it, since it includes the sidewalks, it is truly limited to what's in the boundaries? And I might have missed that in there.
Yeah.
Kind of a long document.
It is a long document, you're right. No, it's described I don't have the section number off the top of my head, but the boundaries of the district are shown in the map. I think it's the map in Appendix A. And it includes the parcels and the rights-of-way and streets immediately adjacent thereto. So Gallagher, France, and 72nd. Just those immediate areas.
Okay, so I guess just again informationally, so with other TIF districts formed that have multiple properties, do you know much of the history with when those were formed and why they included multiple ones? I know some were like city-owned parcels, correct? It's just...
How much time do you have?
Well, I think the fear with just TIF districts in general is we think of it as a district, but it's really just limited to the site that it's serving to help the development that needs to get off the ground, but this goes for a certain period of time into the future, of which is hard to predict, where certain funds would want to go and how they're used and controlled. So I know you just said it's unlikely something would add to it, but I just recall other times we have TIF districts with multiple properties, and so I guess what is limiting that? And obviously it's a city council decision, but I think it just helps us understand.
Yeah. So when Edina creates a TIF district boundary, we look at the project that's in front of us. We try to keep the boundaries as small as possible. There's different strategies. I've worked in other cities where they include as many parcels as they possibly can, and they hope for the best. In Edina, we try to be more strategic. So in this case, we know that we can expect change on these two parcels. The surrounding neighbors, an established successful apartment building to the west, an established neighborhood of single-family homes to the northwest, an established occupied operating senior living to the north, occupied office building, medical office building to the south. We don't forecast any change in those properties. So to include them in a TIF district, you still have to prove that they're blighted. A single-family neighborhood with occupied homes and occupied medical office building, I don't think we'd be able to prove that they're blighted to even include them. In this particular case, these two office buildings were vacant. One of them had been condemned because it was structurally unsafe. They clearly met the blight standard. So that's how we established those boundaries.
Well, thanks, that helps. It's good to understand the strategy, but we do know, like in other districts, we're not necessarily obligated to have geographically connected areas. It can be a spot over here, a spot over here.
They need to be connected.
So in Grandview, they're all connected? I thought they're separate. So they're not? Okay. They're different TIF districts between them?
No. Again, we're kind of getting far afield here, but in the Grandview 2 district, in the Grandview 1 district from the 1980s, it included properties west of Vernon, east of Vernon, all the way to Highway 100. That district is decades old and gone, decertified. The Grandview 2 district that was drawn was much smaller in scale. And again, same strategy. We looked at the parcels that we reasonably expected to change. The old school bus barn site, the city's old public works site, the public parking garage that served all those areas. I think we included the parcel that eventually OLG purchased, the old Warner site. At the time we created it, we thought that might be an opportunity for redevelopment. So we shaped that boundary just like we did this district, trying to reasonably predict what can happen in the next couple years. Not a hope and a prayer, but what we can reasonably expect and still pass that blight standard.
Sounds good. Sorry, I'm getting us way off track, so
yeah, we are.
I'll just cut you off. My bad. Any other questions? We give you a motion, right? A recommendation here?
We are seeking a motion to approve the resolution.
Yeah. Any motions to approve?
I move to approve Resolution B-23-4 as outlined in the staff report.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Go ahead. Oh, you got it.
Good.
We'll say a felt second there. All in favor,
Well,
say.
can we have
sorry.
discussion?
Yeah, we can have a discussion. Yep.
So yeah, I'm just going to, I guess, reiterate kind of what Commissioner Olson said, where, I'm not against TIF per se, but, if we're going to use, our tax revenue to produce something, I think what should happen is that the city should come up with plans for best possible bikeway, best possible whatever. And then the money gets used that way. And this isn't what's happened. It was just, as far as I remember, it was described as, well, the developer is, chipping in this stuff, it's the best they can do, whatever. And it's like, not really. And now we're paying for it. It just doesn't seem like it's the right use. So I'm going to vote against this. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Yeah, Commissioner Olson.
Although I agree with everything Commissioner Miranda said, I think at this point I will support, because the land use requirement of what Manager Nudendorf said, but kind of going back, in a perfect world, a luxury hotel, a Class A medical building, to me, the public is helping subsidize those uses that the general public really aren't going to benefit from. But that's separate. I'm not a council member. This does meet everything that manager outlined, so I will be supporting it.
Any other comments or proposed revisions? Yes.
I do like seeing the north-south street in there and the separated bike path trail. The overlooks and 51% of the site is open space. That ravine in the back is deep. There's going to be some money that goes into taking care of that retention pond. And I think those are all for the public good. And so based on those things, I'm going to vote to approve.
Okay, so we had a motion and a second. We'll just do all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. The resolution B 2304 has been moved to the City Council for approval. So as we talked about, we moved the development review process discussion to the end of the agenda so we don't keep our development friends here too long. So you guys are up next. I guess we will have Director Teague present and then open it for questions and then give the applicant a chance to present too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. I will be quick. This is your opportunity to talk about the land use piece of the project that you just discussed. So I'll just skip through this quickly. So we went through the comprehensive plan. It was zoned for planned unit development. There's a specific ordinance for this site. These are the existing, well, they're not existing anymore. The buildings have been removed and the site is vacant. So this is the approved PUD plan for the site. So this is that southern office building. The hope is to begin construction this summer. The site that we're looking at is the Phase 2 site. So with Phase 1, everything that's outside of this dashed line will be constructed. So all of the green space, the infiltration basin, the north-south street, the sidewalks, everything will be developed with Phase 1. The only piece that has not been approved is that Phase 2. So they need a full site plan approval from Planning Commission and City Council. So the idea here this evening is to get sketch plan comments on that proposal. So here is a look at the building. There would be a restaurant on the corner. I'm going to move through these quick because the developer architect will go through these in a little bit more detail. The idea here is that the height of the building was established with the PUD at 72 feet. This project would still conform to that. Also, there's some step back requirements. You can see the 72 feet there. Needs to step in 10 feet, similar to the office building. A couple of other conditions of note on the PUD was that we wanted to see entrances off of 72nd and France. So the restaurant here on the corner would have an entrance off of France as well as 72nd. One thing to take a look at here for discussion is they're proposing this entry up above the north-south street. There's some grade issues on why they can't be connected. This entrance was shown as part of that overall plan. I'll go back to it. You can see there was 2 entrances here, but that might be worth discussion. Do we want to have 1 entrance there? A couple other areas that I want to mention is the setback on 72nd Street. What was approved in the PUD was a 35-foot setback. They're proposing a 30-foot setback, so a little bit closer to the street than what was originally approved. That said, within the zoning ordinance, we talk about those east-west streets having a 30-foot setback from the building to the curb. So it's consistent with the design experience guidelines and code. It's just not consistent with the PUD that was approved for this site. Another issue that staff has some concern about, and this will get flushed out in a parking study, is you may recall with this Phase 1 approval, the office building and coffee shop was short parked by about 80-some parking stalls. The idea was they could be provided in a surface parking lot in this arrangement if they're needed. The developer, if Phase 2 doesn't happen, didn't believe they needed those 83 stalls, but the parking study and the code says that they did need those stalls. So when Phase 2 develops, the idea was to provide that needed parking for Phase 1. That said, with this project, they're about 150 stalls short now. So that's a concern. The idea is a shared parking arrangement because all of that parking is available on both phases. So there could be some valet parking with the restaurant and the hotel, shared daytime, nighttime uses. That'll all get fleshed out as part of the parking study, so we don't have answers tonight, but just want to raise that as a potential concern with any formal application that moves through. So those were the issues that staff wanted to raise. With that, I can stand for any questions that you may have, and the developer architect will go through in a little more detail.
Any quick questions right now for Planner Teague? All right, we'll turn it over to the development team. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Bennett and Planning Commission members. My name is Ted Carlson with Orion Investments, and I office at 6550 York Avenue in Edina. So on behalf of Nate Enger and Terry Grunhagen and from ESG and my development partner Drew Stafford, after acquiring the site in October of 2021 and working through the land use approvals on 7250 France, we're excited to be here tonight to give you a further look into some design ideas for 7200 France. But before we start, thank you for your vote of support as it relates to the previous matter. When we get to this stage, have spent a lot of time and effort on different design iterations. And as we talked through the land use for 7250 France, as reflected in our ordinance and resolution, multifamily housing is one option and hospitality is one option. So they're both clearly listed, and the land uses that are approved, signed, and have been recorded. And, we feel that based upon what's happening in the market, both locally within Edina, what's happening in the capital markets on a national and global scale, which are the toughest they've been in nearly 50 years. And not only that, to further align, more importantly, really, with the design experience guidelines is to create hospitality, mixed use, and in this case, gathering space. And so when we take a look at what's happened in Edina, a new office building hasn't been constructed in over 30 years. We've got 2 opportunities to do that at the U.S. Bank site and here. But then there hasn't been a new hotel constructed aside from Homewood Suites, which is not the level of hotel we'd be looking to do here. There hasn't been a new higher end hotel constructed in our community in over 20 years. And so when we take a look around and do the market study, which we have, and understand what the community needs, we're excited to show this to you tonight. As it relates to parking, as Director Teague hinted at, we will commission a parking and traffic study to expand upon the parking and traffic study that was already done. But another reason that we believe is a positive to pivot away from multifamily is a hotel use, in our belief, has a much lesser demand on parking. And this is why. When I'm a consumer of hotels, I'm rarely in a vehicle that I own or rent. I'm usually ride sharing. And when I visit a hotel or go out for a dinner or something, a lot of times, if I'm nearby in the neighborhood, I'll walk or I'll ride share to get there. So, and then lastly is there's an opportunity with a hotel of a higher caliber to utilize valet parking, in which case can often be parked 3 or 4 deep. So I know parking is often a topic of consideration here. I do believe that this commission is fairly lenient on parking, but it's not really something we're going to address tonight because we haven't done the full market and data studies. I just wanted to provide some talking points around it. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Nate Anger with ESG. He's got some models, some talking points, some 3D fly arounds, and then we'll stand for questions, and we're excited to get your feedback.
Thanks, Ted. Good evening, commissioners, chair. Thank you for your time. It's great to see you all again. I'm going to run us quickly through, I think, the presentation here. A lot of this will be reiterative, I think, for many of you that have been here as Manager Neuendorf had said for the last couple months or even years. But if there are questions, please let us know. I don't think we'll dig too deep in the site. We're all very familiar. You just voted on the TIF district here, so I think we're all localized. Unfortunately, this is still what the weather looks like. I wish it didn't. It is April after all. Just to reinforce what Ted said, when we were looking at this project about 8 months ago, a year ago, we were really looking at 2 options, a multifamily residential project or a hospitality project. And what we're considering right now is about a 150-key boutique hotel. And so what does that mean? Fortunately, we had the opportunity to meet with the Cornelia Neighborhood Group last night, in fact. And so we got some questions about what does boutique hotel mean. I think now is the time maybe to talk about what that is. And express what our opinions on that matter are so you understand the scope and quality. My colleague Terry Gruenhagen actually, I think, said it best that if we do our job correctly, this will seem a whole lot more like a destination high-end restaurant than it will a homeward suites or something like that. So really what we're trying to do is create an experience-centric development here as opposed to a chain hospitality hotel. So these things are still very, very important, and we're just continuing on the architectural principles that we used in the development of the overall site plan. The connectivity, pedestrian engagement, and certainly recognizing the neighboring areas. Like I said, we met with the Cornelia neighborhood last night, and there were a lot of questions regarding what the scope and scale of the project is, how it's addressing the other residential properties, namely to the west and to the north. So as Manager Neuendorf had said, we are still operating within the originally approved kind of box, he called it. So what you can see in this plan on the north side of the site, what we're calling the hotel, is still representative of the boundaries that this commission actually approved last year or several months back at least. We're not deviating from that, nor are we deviating from the height that we talked about. So we're still using the north-south street connector as kind of a boundary for this. We are still utilizing that street for all the service. So the parking entry will be along the north-south street, not on 72nd. The primary sort of drop-off entry will be on 72nd Avenue, but the majority of any traffic that comes to this building would be off the north-south street. That's also where any service that would happen for the site would be. So deliveries, trash, loading, anything like that. Oops. So this is the parcel in particular. This is just the quick data. So we're about 146,000 gross square feet. That's roughly what we were projecting when we were back in front of you previously. So At that point, I think we were considering either a multifamily residential project or a hotel. We were in about 150,000 square feet, so we're a little bit under what we projected. We are 6 stories, which is in keeping with kind of what we showed last time around. It's a 72-foot high building. To remind everybody, one of the discussion points at the city council level is actually the height of that podium. So the design guidelines call for 20 feet, but the city council had actually put a stipulation in that we did a 16-foot first story. So that's what we're doing here, and that's part of the reason that we're able to lower that building. So we are following that guidance that the city council provided us to provide a little bit shorter building. And then here are just some of the primary entrances for the building. So we do have an entrance off of France. That will be one of the formal entries, and the other formal entry for pedestrians would be off 72nd. And then we have a drop-off entry coming off of the circular drop-off within kind of the knuckle of the building here. This is just a parking layout. Director Teague mentioned that we are still ongoing with parking, and part of that is just understanding how much we can get in structured parking. So we're still looking into that as we go. This is a site plan that just really shows how we interact with grade. It is a little deceiving because it's been rotated. North is to the right on this diagram. And then kind of a typical layout, and certainly if there's questions about how a hotel operates of this caliber, we can go into that more formally. This would be pretty typical of kind of a boutique hotel layout. And then this is a section as if you were standing on France Avenue looking to the west to really show the relationship height-wise between the 7250 France office building and the 7200 hospitality project. One thing of note here is that we're really trying to align architectural datums. So these buildings will be complementary. They won't be identical. We think it's really important for the character and quality to each building to speak on its own. The typology in an office is different than a hotel. So the window sizing and spacing will be different. It will read different architecturally, but we'll use the same materiality and certainly level of quality. And Director Teague had showed this section. We can certainly come back to it if there's questions. And then finally, a couple quick views of how it posits itself on the site. And a lot of this, I think, will be familiar to people who have already seen this site. But we can certainly come back to these if there's specific questions. And with that, I think we'd like to stand for questions. Ted, unless you have anything else?
No, that's it. I just wanted to comment on a couple of other things that, we've kind of held sacred. Is number one, the stormwater basin, which will be dry most of the time, is over 1 acre in size. So I think that recognize it, we've got a heck of a buffer between us and the single family. And then secondly, as we look at the design experience guidelines, that's really important, but how do we personify that and bring it to life here? Well, a hotel is a very complementary use to a Class AA office building for corporate travel, visitors, events, so on and so forth. But furthermore, it provides a food and beverage option for those patrons of the office building. It provides shared workout facilities so that our office tenants could use the facilities in the hotel and they're not redundant. And it should provide greater activation for Danila Plaza between the two. So that's just a couple more reasons why we like hospitality use on this site. So with that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Exciting stuff. Questions? Comment? Yeah, questions for the developer, please. Commissioner Strauss.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you. The reference was that the hotel would have vehicle access off of France. Where you're talking about the northmost 72nd Street then, right?
Commissioner Strauss, thank you. Let me clarify that. I think perhaps I misspoke or I was not clear. I think this might have been the diagram that you were talking about.
Yeah, that arrow.
Yeah, so I should be clear. The green arrow off of France is pedestrian access only. There is no vehicular access there. So we would probably have pedestrian access off of 72nd. Any primary vehicular access is going to be turning off of 72nd into the drop-off area.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I like how both buildings, the setback to France is similar height as well as the same setback. This is going to be a very nice face. What is the reference to the Danila? Is that?
Danila, yes.
What does that mean?
My daughter's name is Danny,
that's-
and Drew's daughter's name is Mila.
Okay.
So it's a combination of Danny and Mila.
You got my vote already. No, that's good. Okay. But a public easement, but that's kind of, that doesn't appear to accommodate maybe some service vehicle or something, but it's really meant as a pedestrian.
It is an entirely pedestrian access, yes.
And those switchbacks, I mean, those like just like terrace sidewalks going up.
That is correct. I think Manager Neuendorf had mentioned that this site has a lot of grade and as a contributing factor to why some of the other developments were challenged. So one of the things Danila does is actually provide access almost down 18 feet from France down to where it intersects our north-south street. So those switchbacks are really accessible ramps that allow people to navigate that without rolling to their doom.
And maybe, do you envision the hotel project, I mean, incorporating that experience directly to the west where the wetland or the pond is? Is that, I mean, is that going to serve a purpose for your hotel use? I mean, is it going to be like public space for, or is that not meant to be?
It's really meant to be more of a native area.
Okay.
With, we're working to maintain as many of the natural trees that we can. There's a lot of invasive or non-native species that will get replaced in accordance with the city forester's recommendations. Correct, Director T?
So walking paths and
it's walking paths, it's pollinators. It's designed to handle a bunch of water in large rain or melt events. It's really a natural area buffer. I don't expect that it would be any type of programming.
Okay.
We do have areas along the plaza to program where it's not the stormwater basin for food trucks and things like that nature, to be a benefit to not only patrons of the site but also the community.
That's okay. Yeah, that's so it looks like it's there. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Strauss. And Commissioner Olson.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited about this, and I really hope you do the spa, because there's no place in Edina. You got to go downtown or out to Egan, so I'm pushing for that. But my question is, I was glad to see the glass where the restaurant would be on France, and I think we talked about this with the other building, making sure that because the entrances are it's kind of like the back of the building is what's facing France. It's early yet, but would the idea be that maybe there could be a patio or something that adds some life around the sidewalk area?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, great question. So to make sure that I understand the question, you're talking about at grade level on the corner there, or are you talking up on the roof? Sidewalk level. Okay, great. Yes. I think the intention would be based on programming, and oftentimes the main level of these types of hotels are really active. If you've been to Viking Lakes, for instance, which is kind of the caliber of hotel we're talking about here, that would be a very active lobby space. So we'd be able to see all the way through the building, lots of glass, lots of transparency, people coming and going. Could there be an outdoor patio there? I think so. I think it just all depends on what kind of uses we have.
Commissioner. Whoa, I saw a lot of. Let's just go in order. Student Commissioner.
I was wondering if you were planning on including any reusable energy, like solar panels, possibly on the rooftop.
I think our intent as we come back for a formal submission, make sure that we're in compliance with Edina's sustainability policy.
All right, Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. So this is it's definitely exciting, I think. When I think about the hotels in this region, there's the Homewood Suites, which I think you mentioned. That's not know what this is. There's the Westin, right? That's close by. That is probably closer to the caliber of hotel that you're looking at. I know along 494, there's a ton of hotels across the street, up and down. Maybe not super high end. The closer you get to the airport, of course, you get to those Ivy Blue, I think it's called, or something like that. And then I know Sofitel, if you guys can remember that spot, it was like a French-style boutique hotel. Is what I don't think it's there anymore. I think it got downgraded into a lower class type hotel. It might be a Sheraton or something now, but I went to my friend's wedding there. It was amazing, and I was so sad that it went away. So I guess for you guys, as you're thinking about making this a boutique hotel, could you just talk more about what does boutique hotel mean for this spot? And when you say that you did the market analysis, how does that compare to the other hotels in the region, especially like the Westin that's really close by?
Yeah. I think boutique hotel for us, Commissioner Smith, the most applicable local example would be the Hewing Hotel in Minneapolis. And I don't necessarily want to talk about the look or feel, but I think it's more the quality of the actual hotel resident experience, if that makes sense, where you've got high quality rooms, high quality food and beverage, and concierge level of service with valet parking and things like that. And so then to take it a step further is that Marriott has autograph and/or tribute collections, where you've got the power of a Marriott booking system, but they're very locally designed, branded, and flavored so that they are truly independently owned and operated. So we believe that finding that high quality patron experience with high quality food and beverage is really important, and that's more of the experience we're looking for. I think it might be much more comparable to a Westin, but a more intimate, smaller, personal feel at 6 stories instead of 20-plus stories.
Mr. Carlson, if I could elaborate a little bit on that. One of the other things that is really distinctive about a boutique hotel like Ted is talking about here is the ability for it to be bespoke or unique. And so because it is a smaller footprint, 150 keys, allows us to do some things that are a little bit more unique on this site. We've already talked about a couple ideas, but that would be what would set it apart from like a Westin, for instance, or even the Sofitel. This would be something that you couldn't find anywhere else. And so I do think the Hewing is apt. Viking Lakes is a good example. These are hotels that are destinations, and they're an experience into themselves that you can't achieve anywhere else. And so that's what boutique really means to us.
Would it be bespoke?
I think I did say bespoke.
Okay. Or
but it
curated?
Is that. Either way, yes.
Thank you.
Down the line, Commissioner Padilla.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again. A couple questions. Is following up on Commissioner Smith's line of questioning. I'd been thinking in terms of comparison to the Westin, as that's closest and fairly modern, but I understand your analogy to the Ewing. Do you have a benchmark or metric of what you would consider, what is the target occupancy rate that you're looking at?
Not really. Do we? I mean, we've got a range of different studies, and I think that would be part of what we brought further.
And do you know what the Westin's is, or what the standard target rate is?
We don't have that data yet. Do you know it? I don't know it.
I don't, but there's, okay. We don't have that at hand.
How many people were at your neighborhood meeting last night?
I think we had 28 to 30 people.
And you mentioned that they had some questions and that they had some concerns. Are you able to categorize their feedback as positive, negative, open? How would you?
I would categorize the feedback as very interested and engaged. Okay. So I would even go a step further. Maybe this helps with the direction of your question. We got kind of 2 categories of interest as it relates to the site. So one of those categories was, I'll call it noise and sound. So there was some concern or some interest from the neighborhood about the amount of activity that would be generated from this use, specifically kind of after-hours activity. So there were some concerns about, a rooftop deck amenity, for instance, having a rave, for instance, into like 2 a.m. in the morning. And so we talked a little bit more about the quality of experience that we would be having here, that this is not kind of a party hotel. This is more about a refined experience. Mm-hmm. So that was one level of concerns. The other was, I think, more about massing and height. And so we just reiterated to the neighborhood and showed them these images, which I think were very helpful about showing how far away from actually the west neighbors this truly is. It's set back quite a ways. It has basically a whole site worth of setback because of the stormwater. So I think most of those concerns were assuaged with that, but I'm sure there's still.
Yeah, and I would add, Commissioner Padilla, we heard traffic is always a major concern. So as part of a formal submission, we would update the traffic and parking study. But back to the noise concern, is another reason why we like this use is that a hotel, especially a curated hotel, is very aligned with having a quiet experience for their patrons.
And have you given any thought at all to a combination, the way the Westin has residences and hotels in the same building? Have you considered that at all?
We have not. I think I think that would be largely due to the overall relatively small and bespoke size of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Felt? Go for it.
Hi. Thank you for being here, and thank you for meeting with the Cornelia neighborhood. I know it's not required, but I think it's always appreciated when you reach out and do that. I had some. When I want to say I do think the site is nice. That east-west easement is going to be active, and I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate how and this is the other building, how that was delineated, the hierarchy of the first floor, that plinth, the office buildings, and maybe the more private up above. I would like to see that kind of hierarchy in this one too, because I think when buildings make sense to people, when they reflect what they are, so that public space on the main level and the more private spaces up above. But I'm going to go on. So you guys, you decided not to do the apartments and switch to hotels. And can you tell me a little bit about that process?
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. I think we were very clear during our land use that multifamily or hospitality were both on the table. Mm-hmm. So I think we were at a time then when I think our approvals were in October, November, where we were still really working to evaluate the market. I mean, our final approvals didn't happen until February, but is it fair to say that was more administrative and the real? Can you help me with the timing on that?
Yeah, I think when it went through Planning Commission, it was more apartment.
Okay.
And it was when it went through City Council that the possibility about the hospitality became more in the discussion.
Thank you for the clarity, and I didn't mean to misrepresent
That's okay.
that. But so we've always said we need to tackle the office building first, which we're dangerously close to completing, knock on wood. And then it was, okay, as we get this $85 million project off the ground, what's next? And so now, as we're forward thinking, that we think that this is the most logical, best fit for the site from a citizen, a kind of a land use, if you will, and from a capital markets perspective. So when we look at just to name apartment projects for a minute, are the activation down off 77th with 2 large projects that are under construction, our other project at the U.S. Bank site, the potential Macy's site, the former Perkins site, the Stilts building across 100 from here. there's quite a few other sites that are currently under consideration for multifamily. So as we look throughout the community at what's planned, coming, or possible versus what is not in our community and what is a complementary use, we think at this time hospitality is the best fit for kind of all concerned parties.
Okay. And another question, can you tell me a little bit about the, I know the street drops down to the middle and goes back up, and so you want to be able to get trucks underneath and buses to be able to turn around in that space. But I am a little bothered by the two driveways right next to each other. And I'm sure you've tried to do this multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any way to get them
Separated.
together? What?
Separated apart, I think is what you're asking.
Separated apart or together?
Oh, combined.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Felt. I think that's a great question, and as Ted alluded to, it's still pretty early days on this. So that, I think, something in conjunction with the traffic study, we'll find may be something we have to do anyway. Our team has been looking at, not to bury the lead here, but several different configurations of this, some of which might completely reconfigure that turnaround. So it is something that we're aware of. We are studying it. I do agree, I think, on a personal level, that somehow combining that makes more sense. We'll just have to see how it all works out.
Yeah, because if it is, you're going to do your parking study coming up, but you're trying to make sure you're trying to play with the numbers or get them reduced or share the parking, but it typically means like overflow parking on the street. Did you, two questions about that. Did you talk to Cornelia, the neighborhood, about the parking on the street?
We have not, no.
Okay. And then the other observation about that is when those two driveways are close together, the space between, it gets more difficult to park cars along there.
Yes, and I think that's why we'll continue to study not only the distance they are apart or whether they're combined, but that whole entry sequence. Okay. Because you are correct, I think, insightfully, that that is going to be a primary consideration for the neighborhood and for us. How does that traffic flow work? As Ted alluded to, the guest experience is, a primary value to us, and that's going to be a primary value also to the neighborhood, just to get traffic off of 72nd.
Yes.
And one last question.
Of course.
And you, Commissioner, who started talking about this, part of that TIF is sustainable design or features and good faith efforts to make opportunities for minorities and women. So I just want to ask you if you've started to think about that. You don't have to answer it yet, but the sooner you think about it, the sooner you can make it a part of.
We're happy to answer that, and it's yes and yes. Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Miranda?
Yeah, thank you. So looking at this project, it looks like the use seems perfectly appropriate here in the Southdale district. The height is fine, setback change I think is fine. I'm perfectly okay with underparking according to our regulations. But it still feels very suburban and car-oriented to me. And in part, I guess to dovetail on the comments about the turnaround or whatever you call that big circle, it seems very large. And I wonder if the whole feel of the place would be better if it were smaller and the building kind of wrapped around. And so you would have sort of this internal area and, people walking or biking or whatever, or neighbors on the west side would see a building, as opposed to, because, you have those you take the pictures from the Southdale guidelines, and it shows these urbanized streets and, all these doorways and activity and everything, and you don't have that here. So is that something you've considered?
Great question, and yes, the answer to that is yes. the turnaround is ultimately going to be driven by the types of vehicles. So, and that itself is driven by the level of service. So we're going to kind of be working at this from both sides. We have to figure out what type of vehicles are going to be dropping off here. And one of the things we ran into on 7250 after site plan approval was access for fire trucks and ambulances and things like that. So that may drive the traffic circle radius too. That being said, I think the comment is still very appropriate, and I think the building massing can kind of wrap that and engage that and maybe even hide that, where it becomes more of like a European motor court or something like that. There might even be an iteration of this where the building rotates a little bit so that we're not exposing that turnaround so much kind of to the west. So those are certainly things we're looking at. I very much appreciate the comment. I think it's probably a smart planning move to continue to explore that.
Okay, thank you.
Just continue over there. Do you have any more questions or comments? How about Commissioner Bornstein?
No, I think it looks like a good start, and the only thing I would add is, as you continue to think about how the other surrounding areas, especially on the other side of France, might continue to develop, just making sure that it doesn't feel like the building's facing backwards or something. That there's something about either the architecture or the materials or some level of interactivity that allows for it to connect with whatever might happen on the other side.
Thank you. And I've got some good news because I'll be here in 2 weeks to present what's happening at Macy's for you, so we can continue this conversation then.
Commissioner Day.
Quick question around, so you had a lot of comments in the community feedback around noise and everything like that. I saw the ballroom. Do you intend this to be a wedding venue?
We intend that the potential for weddings could be a possibility, yes.
Okay. So that would potentially further complicate your parking dilemma then, right? If you have people coming that are not staying at the hotel, a significant number, right, that need to park somewhere. Yeah.
Potentially, and that's one of the reasons we're so excited about the design, frankly, is that, our office building adjacent to the south will be unoccupied on nights and weekends. And that fits very well with larger gatherings of, weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever you may be used for.
I guess the general comment looking at the current plan in terms of thinking about the 75% transparency guidelines, looks like you have a good start with the restaurant, and I'm certainly not a building developer myself, so I'd say there's probably additional opportunities I would think you'd want to consider there, if the ballroom being more transparent or that spot on the corner and stuff like that. Kind of hard to tell. I mean, I know it's just an very initial mock-up and everything like that, but just something to keep in mind because it's definitely a key part of the guideline is to be transparent on the street level. So,
Thank you. All right, I got a few, but thank you guys. Feel historically, usually when phase 2 of anything comes around, it's not the more exciting option, but this certainly is. It's fun to see, and it'd be a welcome addition to Edina and especially this area. So I guess just the use, the trade-off with multifamily, we lose opportunity for affordability in the city, but this is definitely something missing that could ignite and excite that area. So I'm excited about that. And that experience it fosters. Just mentioning the Hewing Hotel brings kind of what I would hope this level of experiences and would continue to see with what you guys bring forth and next. I get some specific comments around gathering space. I think what is exciting about a hotel compared to multifamily is it allows people from all over the community, especially if there's that food and beverage focus, to come and gather. Not only that, have events like a ballroom. And then could you speak to it? Part of the design experience is to step back at 50 feet like you're doing on France, height-wise. It looks like you have room for a balcony, and then it wraps to the south with like a pergola. Is kind of what you're thinking, to have a pretty active balcony level experience? Is that tied to hotel guests, or is it like the Hewing where it's public? I mean, I know this is initial, but speaking of that would be nice to hear.
Thanks, Chair Bennett. Great questions, and I think that gives us an opportunity to further talk about what makes the hotel boutique, right? We do think there's an opportunity for there to be some sort of amenity up there that would be public. And that's something that we talked with the neighborhood group about last night. I think a lot of people were able to visualize what it would mean to be able to walk from the neighborhood, eat at a restaurant, go up onto the roof deck, and overlook Danila Plaza. The orientation right now is actually pretty advantageous because it is not directly out on France. We get a little bit of that view from France, which is kind of nice as a signage opportunity, but it also looks down onto Danila, so now we're getting a little bit more activation. It would be some sort of pergola element, kind of partially open, partially transparent, maybe some lighting, things like that.
Great, yeah, and I guess just comments about that and reaction. When I was first serving on the Planning Commission, we had an ordinance about noise specific to like 50th and France areas, right? That's one that came up. Do you recall that, Carrie? Was it specific to 50th and France, or was that the example with the condos there?
It might have, it came up when we were considering the rooftop dining ordinance and certain noise regulations there.
Well, no, it was before that. And I guess the takeaway and what the Planning Commission supported is, noise can be a nuisance, but also a sign of energy and excitement. And so I would really hope that you activate places outside, right on France for a patio, and this balcony area, if maybe you shield the west side. Unfortunately, you don't see the park, but if that allows that area to be loud and noisier at night, I mean, that's fun, right? And if it's far enough from the neighbors or at least screened, which was part of Edina's requirements, like some screening, I think that'd be a good addition versus, a contentious one. So I'd continue to study that and really encourage you to incorporate it. You had arrows around the building except to Danila, so for pedestrian access. How do you get there? Do you get there along France, or will there be a direct connection to that?
Great question. I think there probably should be a dashed arrow right now because we are so early on. One of the key components when designing a hotel is the service piece. And so right now, that kind of, what would be planned south would be kind of a service bar of kind of back of house. And so I think we're unsure about how to work in that connection, but I think our whole team feels that it's very important to connect down there. So the diagram's a little misleading. I think getting something down on grade, like Commissioner Olson was talking about, not only on 72nd in France, but potentially Danila in France as well, could be very welcome. Oh, please.
Oh, hello.
Hi, members of the commission. My name is Terry Gruenhagen. Nate is one of my partners at ESG Architecture and Design. Just to answer that last question a little better, we are studying a connection for people to access the hotel from Danila. It'll just be smaller in scale.
Yeah, sure, great. And I guess that goes to your other comments. I mean, I think we pictured Tavern on France, what they were able to do with a patio right on France, which you would think, why would you do that? But now with this forced setback from France, you definitely have the opportunity to feed into that and create a walkway destination around all sides of the site, and especially the hotel. I mean, the office building, it's not as exciting to do that, but to get people from the office to this site and to that stormwater area is what we should be doing, and it sounds like you're doing, so that's great.
Yeah, I think just to reference what one of the things Ted said too is we will be sharing amenitization across there. So what you just said, Chair Bennett, about bringing people from the office into this building will be very important, and that Danila entry feels like an important part of that.
Great. You had 30 feet from the property line was the setback. Now, I'm struggling, the tough thing with this site is it doesn't totally fit into the design experience guidelines on all sides because it's on the west side of France, so it's pretty specific about what to do on France. Part of the design experience guideline, I think it's street room typology 4. Oh, great, I scrolled too far in this, I'm not going to find it. Hold on, let me get to it. That's the east-west street, so that, if you continued 72nd as if it were one, which it's not highlighted there, but I think it's something to think about, and it's most probable. How it shows that street room is only a 30-foot setback from the street. So I think it's supportive based off of the guidelines. The only catch is there's a 30-foot step back up at 60 feet. And it looks like you have something with the balcony there, so I'd recommend to exaggerate that, or if you're going to be that close, do something different material-wise to not make it feel like a box on four sides that close to the street.
Yeah, great comment, and I think you kind of identified where our heads are at with this too, is that you can see in this image, I think very well, what you were talking about, is that it feels like that just wraps around, and I think we're going to need to articulate these facades a little bit differently. One thing I would point out is that on the north facade of the building, the deeper that setback gets, the less usable that space gets, because we're not getting sun there, obviously. So it may be something we would explore on the France side, to get a little bit deeper setback there and create that differentiation that I think you're looking for.
Sure.
Yeah, and alternatively, on the 7250 site, our setback from Gallagher, I believe, is 25 feet. Is that correct?
That's right.
Dr. Teague? So
yeah,
we're trying to find that balance where we understand the intent and do our absolute best to adhere to it.
Yeah, I think it's well supported with what you're doing. The next piece is parking. A couple things. So the depth, you're showing 2 levels below grade, which just sounds yikes, just with the water that's close that you're managing. You're confident you're going to have 2 levels below grade?
Yes.
Yeah, we are very confident. So just to put some numbers to that, we're still, where we're showing right now, I think we're still about 6-ish feet, 7 feet above the water table. So one of the things that we are continuing to explore is the parsing of that parking. Is there the possibility of getting a little bit more? We're still looking at that, but I think we were very confident that we don't have water table issues there.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing with the parking that as long as I'm seeing it right, I'd love to see, because it came up when we had comments with the first proposal, was how do you share amenities? It looks like you're connecting P1 to the office building. Is that correct?
We're still working through that design right now. If we would have a connector, it's certainly not a vehicular connector between the two, but it could be a pedestrian connector underneath the NELA. And we actually have a construction planning meeting Friday where we're evaluating that. Is that worth it? Alternatively, for your more urban areas, it would be very common for an office patron to park in the site next door and just walk to their office a quarter block. So we're trying to manage what those expectations are and how they would work together.
So yeah, from what the screen shows, right, the bottom right part of P1 is showing a connection currently.
Yeah, and to clarify, we've had a bunch of different iterations. So we did explore kind of a vehicular connection, and maybe there's some viability to that, but a lot of that is kind of going to be driven by finances. So what we think is most important is the pedestrian connectivity between the sites, especially for your question, Commissioner Day, about the wedding venue. If we did share parking across in the office building, we would want to make it reasonably easy for people to navigate to the other buildings. So that's where the pedestrian connectivity comes in underground.
Yeah, I guess I would continue to strongly urge you have that connection, as noted before, because we have this accordion effect of this site's not used at night, this site is. To have that connection just makes it convenient for people that go to park in the hotel and just can continue to find a spot. To make them drive around the block like we just talked about trying to avoid, to now park in the office building, then get up and walk, that sounds not good. So I strongly recommend continuing that. I like to see it, so I was like, yes. Great. Other thing was the roadway. Since this is technically including the roadway on the west part of the site, the previous, next slide that you were on, or that one. So yeah, you're seeing, and I don't know how it shook out, but I think one thing that came up was how do we prevent people or visitors, et cetera, from making that a speedway. And part of the design ideas were having elevated crossings to really slow people down where people will cross. I don't know what the detail is there, but I continue to just really figure something out as people are driving down. They're not flying to use this as a through street, because they likely would. Especially, there'd be a lot of visitors coming here, not residents, now that it's a hotel. So are there any ideas there or plans with the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So specifically, kind of when we hit, I guess it wouldn't be the apex, it's whatever the opposite of the apex is, the bottom of that. We are doing a tabled intersection there, so that's where the pedestrians cross. So that inherently will slow down traffic because it's bumped, right? The other thing is that because of, at least on the north side, because of the pedestrian and bike infrastructure we have there, it's inherently a traffic calming measure. Anytime you have that kind of there, cars inherently slow down. And then the last thing I guess I would say, and Ted, maybe you want to add to this, is by virtue of having those two doors there, that will force people to slow down because they're the parking entries. So it's going to inherently slow traffic down as people turn in and exit from those spaces.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Commissioner Bennett, we worked with the city and Director Milner and Director Scipione on the specific design of the streets to separate pedestrians, bikes, and cars. And I believe the width of the street was constricted with our final conditions to further improve traffic calming and expand the pedestrian and bikeways. Is that correct, Director Teague? So we've paid strong attention to that because it's also in our best interest.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just thinking historically, when the city's managing their own streets, I haven't seen aggressive measures really all over the city compared to other cities to really calm. So like if you're getting to the bottom, if it's really aggressive and it comes back up and it really try to do something above, I guess, the minimum requirements is what I'd suggest. Last thing would be the sustainability policy that was brought up by our fellow student commissioner. I know you guys will meet it. I know you particularly have an interest in, EV charging. So I think it'd be nice to just see some specific measures next time versus, just we're checking the box. What are you doing above and beyond the normal? I think it just helps sell it. Aside from that, my only comment is typically we have Mick Johnson do a review. Was that done? I guess I didn't see it.
Yeah, he did it for the first one. Since we're just dealing with the box, we didn't ask him to.
Okay, that's it. But yeah, really commend the effort so far, like what's on the table, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. So 8:38 came and went. That was our 8:48 was when we were hoping to be done. Anyways, that's exciting. Our last real agenda item, and kind of fitting with some of the conversations we've had tonight, is a discussion on our development review process. Should I just grab a mouse and click away from here? What would be the easiest? Oh, that seems really official. I could. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't mind taking a mouse and just sitting back there, right? I don't really want to talk at. I want to discuss. Does that work? It'll work for me. All right. Okay. Thank you. Yep. Great. Hi. All right, thank you guys for bearing with me. Oh, we're jumping ahead already. Oh gosh. Did I zoom in here? What did I do? How do you? Yeah. That was kind of delayed, wasn't it? Are we out of range here? Oh, here, I'll just hold it up. Okay, we're good. So some context for people tuning in. The Planning Commission, aside from serving in this capacity publicly that you see televised, we have work sessions throughout the year, and every year we have work items on our work agenda, and we work to improve the process in the city, whether it's zoning amendments, what have you, parking. One of which that's come up more frequently than not in recent past is this desire to improve the development review process. And again, we can have food for thought tonight that maybe stems from the process currently being confusing, and what we're trying to do is make it easier for people. So I'm going to quickly run through our presentation that we gave to our work session a couple weeks ago, but provide some context to those tuning in. So here we go. Come on, I might have to go to the front.
I can move it for you down here.
Yeah? Thank you. I'll just say next. Next. So just some context for the planning, for people who are confused about the Planning Commission, also what is our role. So if you go to the website, this is what our role is, basically to review these plans and advise the City Council on a number of items that relate to general planning. Another way to think about that and to be a little more active about it is our goal really is to optimize the legacy of development and infrastructure in the city. So oftentimes, like you see at our public hearings, we have a single development in front of us that we're making a recommendation on. But to be more proactive in the process is stepping back to the comprehensive plan and getting more engagement up front and be more proactive in general to get people, residents, as well as the developers and the stakeholders involved earlier to really help optimize, the development and infrastructure that we're left with. And so we think of these developments, it's this end product, but any product, the most important part is the process. So it's incumbent upon us to question that process, to scrutinize it, and to improve it. And I think, from my experience being on the Planning Commission, you assume the way we do it is kind of the way it's got to be done because it's a legally binding process. But what we've come to find out is there's options to adapt and improve it. So next. So our focus is the development review process, and we're specifically talking about public hearings and public feedback. We're tabling the sketch plan discussion till after we figure out these two items. And again, it's a balance of residents, developers, volunteers, and city staff. Next. So the current process looks like this. The official, why these are separated is, I think Carrie said probably 99% of the developments that most residents care about and get excited about or concerned about go through this process with a sketch plan to start. And it's an informal submission that you saw tonight that comes before the Planning Commission. We provide non-binding feedback. City Council does the same. Then when a formal application is made, the 60-day window starts, and the city has 60 days to make a decision on that. So instead of making that a super long process officially and rushing it, we kind of delay it informally, and then it begins. A notice happens. The public hearing that, again, you heard one tonight, happens at the Planning Commission level. We have another public hearing at the City Council meeting, and then there's another City Council meeting where a decision's made. Next. So this is a more detailed look at that. You can screenshot that and take a look. But what this is just showing is there's a bunch of different steps and conditions in our process. But all of this is unique to Edina. If you take all of this, there's no other city around that matches these exactly. And we'll get into that. And one reminder as we think about improving the process. We think because the public hearing is televised and it's the last opportunity for someone to speak, that it's like the main way to get public input, but it's just a way, not the way. So one of the other ways that we really rely on is Better Together, and that is currently in a form where residents can see what's going on, be informed of the project, and then submit their opinions. And those just get hidden and then delivered to the planning commission or city council before their meeting. And our commitment to the community is that all input is considered. So if you look around that wheel, there's a bunch of different ways that feedback is sought. You heard it tonight. The developers had a neighborhood meeting. Almost always for any sketch plan that happens, a neighborhood meeting usually happens with that. That's not required. It's just recommended. And there's ways that the city and we can encourage input in different ways. And then this is the spectrum. You have different ways in which we get. So Better Together serves both as a way to inform residents of what's going on. The public hearing is actually only a way for residents to consult, for us to consult with them. It's a one-way street. They provide a testimony. We take that input and make a decision off of it, but it's not that collaborative. So currently the circle kind of indicates what we're doing right now. And if you look at Better Together, it has the opportunity to have collaboration, but currently there really isn't collaboration on it. Public hearings also spill into, we're informing the public a lot of times. A lot of times it's the first time they're finding out, or even the sketch plan, we hope they do, but sometimes the people who really care find out then for the first time. Next. So what we've kind of studied, and we've had multiple meetings internally with the Planning Commission, with City Council for feedback on this, we've identified quite a bit of challenges with the current process, and they're all listed there. But you heard it tonight with the public hearing regarding the rezoning. There's an air of confusion in our process because there's confusing deadlines, there's a duplication of efforts and seemingly obligations for residents to show up and opine, and that brings an inherent lack of trust that all comments, regardless of the method, are valued. And so the multiple hearings makes for longer hearings, and it's difficult for people to engage. Other things for developers, it's the same story: duplicative, confusing, non-collaborative, and inputs tends to be received later in the process. And with that which we know is the later feedback's received, the harder it is to incorporate that into changes. Same goes for the Planning Commission. And again, we heard it tonight. When we made a recommendation for the subdivision, we didn't get all of the feedback to maybe, give a more complete recommendation to the City Council. Even though public hearings are not the way to engage, we know that there's a truth that when you're in person with someone, there's a higher ability to influence them or make it feel like you're getting your voice directly across more thoroughly and effectively. So we find that the Planning Commission doesn't necessarily get all of the feedback up front, and it's delayed to the City Council meeting. And that delayed engagement pushes the potential for change later in the process. Duplicating effort, same with the City Council. Mixed messages, missing feedback from the Planning Commission, longer City Council meetings, and currently, because of the pandemic, the City Council split their meetings, so they have the public hearing, but they don't decide till later. So it's a lot of time and stress on residents and others before a decision's made. Next. So our goals are threefold: to simplify the development review process, optimize it at the same time, and hopefully implement a new development review process. So the first one, what we've come to the conclusion on, and we'll get into kind of how we optimize this, is how do we shorten this process? Currently, it's long, there's duplication, and what we've all agreed on, City Council alike, is we should get this down to one public hearing and one City Council meeting. So how do we optimize that? There's a balance of opinions here. We all have different feedback and different vantage points on this. But in the end, our recommendation comes with falling on the proactive side and engaging stakeholders proactively more equitably and longer. So what we're trying to answer is, okay, if we do one public hearing, where should that be? City council or planning commission? What do other cities do? And then at the same time, how do we elevate that other form of input and feedback? And so that's expanding the Better Together comment period and features. So how do we make it more collaborative? How do we involve people a little more effectively? And so when we look at the current process, what do other cities do? So this is kind of a breakdown so people understand kind of some base rationale with our recommendation to the City Council. The yellow boxes are basically the cities that only have one public hearing, both for rezoning and PUD, rezoning in green, PUD in blue. The cities that only have one public hearing, they all occur at the Planning Commission. So there's 8 nearby similar cities that do that for all rezoning, 7 that do it for PUD. And I guess the takeaway here is Edina is like Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Golden Valley, to a degree, where there's 2 meetings, but no city has one public hearing at the City Council only. So if we're going to just take cues from others and what they're doing, this seems like a logical place to start. Next. So some pros and cons as we identify that is, again, the pros we've talked about, it's a shorter, simplified process. Residents have only one public hearing to review and attend. That's less confusing. Residents have only one City Council meeting to review and attend. The proactive nature, the public hearings earlier in the process, engaging people earlier. The Planning Commission would basically, as Commissioner Olson described it, give a present wrapped with a bow to the City Council where this is a complete package with all the feedback and input. Here you go. Council meetings are shorter. This is typical with standard big government where you have different bodies that make strong recommendations to a narrower body like the president, the cabinet, and they make a decision, not have a whole nother similar process. Duplicated efforts are reduced, and other forms of feedback are in effect elevated. The cons are less public hearings means less opportunities to engage. With any change, residents may feel it everyone's just communicating and navigating change brings about a challenge. Residents may feel at first with this change that they aren't directly addressing the City Council, who are the people they voted for. The City Council and the mayor, we know, are accustomed to the current orders of operation. The buck stops here. And that's the cons. So just considering those, we feel that the pros outweigh the cons here. So now let's go to the other forms of feedback. So currently Better Together has a form like this. Historically, it was more collaborative, and that's what we're going to propose to bring it back to. Next slide. And that's to make it more of a real time, where you'll see the comments, you'll see what people are saying. This is, again, the duplication, even for us in City Council, when we have the same type of message 40 times, people can easily, sum up things if they see others communicating. This makes it a little more collaborative. So this kind of expands and increases that impact on decision for at least the engagement side that doesn't happen at the very end, which is a public hearing. How do we get more people to engage early, regardless is that, and then to simplify the public hearing and that process that people called in about, we need to strive for a simple process. So as it affects this spectrum, we feel that having one public hearing at the Planning Commission elevates other feedback and inherently increases the effectiveness of other areas here. Next. So considering both of those, the pros and cons still outweigh, or the pros still outweigh the cons, and the difference, Better Together comments are real time. And I think there's this notion of transparency that everyone's looking for. So when you see comments, then you can assume the city and staff, and as well as us volunteers, have seen them, and it brings about a more collaborative spirit. And a shorter overall process allows people to encourages earlier participation. So this is what it would look like. So the 60-day clock starts with the application. There's a notice. Notices are mailed. Better Together opens, stays open until after the Planning Commission. So if people have feedback from our meeting that is supportive or not, then the City Council still does see that. The public hearing would happen in person or call-in at the Planning Commission, and we provide a recommendation, which we propose the City Council, since they have a complete package, they'd be able to review the recorded session, see everyone's feedback in person. They'd be able to make that decision right then and there instead of having 2 meetings. So just how it compares, this is a new slide. This is just so people can see. So we're eliminating 1 meeting and 1 public hearing, and it looks simpler. So one thing that came up, right, is what is that resident conduit at the city to the City Council if we change this? Because there is this notion, I voted for this person, I need to speak to them, and I need to talk to them. What we're trying to show with this table and breakdown is there's still plenty of opportunities to engage with the City Council proactively, whether it's an email to them or a request to meet with them in person. People do this. There's still a community comment. If you have things you would like to say, not on an agenda, this isn't really related to public hearing, but there's that way. On Better Together, official city media, all of this does go to the City Council and is reviewed. And then most importantly, the public hearing at the Planning Commission, that would be televised, and that input is then considered in a recommendation we would have where the City Council is seeing that directly before their meeting. So again, here are the goals, and the last one is to implement a new development process. And we kind of highlighted what that'd be. A key thing we wanted to add here is, like, we want a public feedback loop here. So I think when you make a change, we need to make sure that change is a good one. So we commit to reassess after 2 years. Is this working? If it is, let's keep with it. But if for some reason it's not, we reconsider going back or changing it to something different. And so here is the recommendations. 1 public hearing at the Planning Commission, 1 City Council meeting following the public hearing. Better Together enabled with live comments and open after the public hearing until the City Council meeting, and reassess after 2 years using public feedback loop. So this is what it looks like. And we explored alternatives, and they're kept later in this, but that is basically if we just had the public hearing at the City Council. We kind of talked why ultimately there's pros that outweigh the cons of having it earlier. So I think that's good. And I just, right now, we cut our meeting short in our work session. So I know it's late, but we still want to make sure that we all have a chance to discuss before we bring this before the City Council. Is it next Tuesday? So they have a work set. Is that we join them for an item on their work session at, say, 6 or something?
Yes, at 5:30.
And so this would this be a recommendation to them, but we would still present that at a formal public hearing later, but this is to say, hey, this is where we're at, this is what we're going to propose, this is what we want your buy-in for.
Right, yeah, they won't make a decision that night, but you will present them their recommendation.
And it would
we
look
have the
similar
full
to
hour.
this presentation.
Yep.
Okay.
You can make this same presentation.
That's the goal. So definitely want to open it up to discussion among the Planning Commission. We, again, cut it short, but we want to just go in a line, people share their thoughts. And I'll start down there, Commissioner Olson.
Excellent job, Chair Bennett. Very good job. And I also want to shout out to the staff. Staff has put in MJ, there's Addison, people, Carrie, Liz, a lot of work that staff went in, and that cannot be stressed enough how many hours you guys have put into this. As we started talking about this almost a year ago, I mean, it was right when a long time ago, one of the things that kind of dawned on me when we were going through this is, I don't know if a weakness is a strength overdone. I don't know if you have heard that, but it was almost, in my view, that the wonderful ways of engagement that Edina has was almost too much for people, so it was starting to become a weakness. And we heard it tonight with the caller who thought she had an opportunity to talk about the initial development when that was not even what we were talking about, and so it's confusing to people. So I support this. I think one public hearing makes it much easier for people. I like the iterative nature of the Better Together so people can see. I don't know if people can like things in Better Together, but, kind of letting so you don't get the redundancy in the same thing coming in over and over. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I think former Chair Agnew, who's now the city council member, she was very eloquent in saying, the primary goal is getting down to one public hearing. The Planning Commission would be the desired. I'm agnostic really on where it would go. I think getting it down to one is the most important. So that's my view.
Agree for all the reasons you already stated. Just add that it looks like a lot of folks have put a lot of work and thought into this. And as someone who's brand new to it, I don't have any way to second guess that. And there's also very little risk, I think, associated with it since we're going to reassess 2 years from now. So for all those reasons, I support it.
I sat through a number of these sessions, and I never had any clear idea at the end where we were at, other than that we certainly circled the issue again, and then we came back. And it was almost, I was convinced by the last person I heard, which is no way to make decisions either. So where I'm going is I think this, and what we had agreed on is that there are pros and there's cons. I think you captured that in this, and that we had agreed that it was important to do something. This is something they can propose on. And the one thing is that in this presentation, I think, really made it clear of the discussion is it's good. It encapsulated what we were talking about and where we wanted to go, as well as anything we've had in front of us. So very good there. But that one, review it after 2 years. That's where we're, let them, try it and see. And so that's my only other point. But very good work. I think you must have did some heavy lifting on this. So thank you, Jimmy. Huh? Thanks. Okay.
Okay, not a whole lot much more to add. I agree with the general approach. Sometimes simpler is better, right? Less is more. Like I said earlier, right, it was kind of interesting that we were hearing feedback about how confusing the process was on a night that we're talking about our review process. So an opportunity for us to take that, and really think about that as we have this discussion. It was interesting. After we talked about this the first time and in preparation for this meeting, a few nights ago, I actually asked my wife, I said, what would you do, like without me telling you, because I'm on the Planning Commission, so I know, I didn't know before, if you had to provide feedback, on a development in the city, and like how would you know what to do and how that process works, right? Okay, so it goes to the City of Edina website, and it's like, all right, it's kind of confusing, and finally figured out how to get to Better Together Edina, and then she was like, well, this is interesting, but I don't really know, who reads Better Together Edina? Does it go to the Planning Commission? Does it go to the City Council? It wasn't really super clear, right? And so she was kind of, frustrated a little bit, and then I said, all right, well, this is what we're proposing. And I showed this diagram right here. It's great because we have this one on. And I said, and she's like, well, that makes a lot more sense to me now that I see this diagram. And I said, well, yeah, wouldn't it be really nice if we had this diagram or like this workflow on the Better Together Edina website, right? Or like on the public hearing site and say, this was what happens, this flow chart, and this is where the comments and feedback go to. And I was like, yeah, that would be really great. So my general comment would be this workflow as we see it right here, right? Adopting it. I'd love to see it plastered or more apparent on the Better Together website, and make it a little bit more obvious, right? Because right now it's very text heavy and it's kind of, I think, a little bit confusing, right? I think this workflow and really having that front and center on the first page, however we get to that, and to say this is what our review process looks like, right? That could be beneficial. So kind of anecdotal experience here, but I thought it was a valuable exercise to say, as we look through this and talk about this, what would you do? And just, again, kind of confusing, and then once we saw this was better, and I think if more residents saw this, right, it might be a little bit more clear to them. So, yeah, so I'm in support of this.
The new review process seems much more concise than the one before, and it looks like a lot of time would be saved for people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a change that we want to put forward to the city. It's definitely more concise. It focuses the energy with the Planning Commission to receive and listen to the public hearing. One of the key things, of course, is that we want to learn. We want to learn from residents. We want to get some feedback from them on, is this working out? Is it simpler? Are you getting your voices out? Are you using all the different vehicles that the city has provided? And so we definitely want feedback to be a key part of this. But I think for change to happen, we got to take that first step. And I think this is that first step. And I'm in support of this, and certainly looking forward to, getting the feedback from residents on if it's going to be working out. Hopefully it's going to get approved by the City Council. But getting the residents' feedback on how we're doing is going to be really important for this project.
I believe that it is imperative that we move to one public hearing. Otherwise, it's just so confusing. And I also believe that the proper place for that is the Planning Commission. And that probably gives us more work. I think that makes, that process longer. And I think one of the things that we need to do to ensure the success in terms of relating to the community is to have better communication. And whether that's at the front end in terms of letting the whole community know how the Planning Commission is appointed and what we go through and what our backgrounds are and what our names are. And I think they're public record anyway. I think I believe it's all out there, so I don't think we're disclosing anything that, violates data privacy laws or anything like that. Of course, nobody wants to be besieged by phone calls or anything like that, but just to make it more transparent in terms of, or inspiring confidence, I would hope, that there's people with, well-versed backgrounds that are sitting on here helping wrap that bow around that package to give to the City Council based upon all of our unique combined experiences. And then I think also educating the community. What we heard tonight from the community represented, I think, a very well-educated, well-thought-out comments in terms of the questions that we got and the feedback and things like that. But we also have all come across in the feedback that we receive lots of comments of people that don't understand either our job or what's in the comprehensive plan or what we're trying to achieve or what we're going after. I believe we would preclude some of the resistance we get to some of the developments and some of the feedback we have to go through if the public at large was better educated in terms of what it means to increase your tax base and how that impacts property taxes and the services that are provided, through the property taxes and things like that. So, and I don't know whether that falls on us or exactly where, that onus falls, but I believe that this process, we could ensure the success of this process if there's better communication. So I'd like to see that.
My turn? Okay. I also want to thank staff and everybody I know there's been a lot of work that's been put in on this. And I'm completely in agreement for making it simpler. And because this is our public meeting and people are listening live, people can watch live, and this is taped. I want to say this for the public. I want the public to understand that they are being heard. When they're on Better Together and they can put in their comments, I want them to be able to see. And I know there's a lot of work that you guys you go through and like work out all these details, but I want to say this publicly in the meeting, that people can see what other people are thinking about this project so they can distill their thoughts and think through it. And I want them to know that, and they've got on there that who's listening. They've got the staff members' names and emails, and so they know who's listening, and they get answers from staff. But I think they also want to have personal conversations, and they want to make sure that they're being heard, so they can still have those personal conversations with City Council. And they can still send in information. So I want them to know also that their information is being collected and handed to the Planning Commission, and it's also being collected and handed to the City Council. So making that upfront so they understand that. Making it very easy. I read everything you said, making it very easy for them to understand how this process works for them. Yeah, and those are... So I'm all for it, but I want to put our best foot forward. Of course, we're going to reassess this, but I want to put our best foot forward and have the public be really comfortable with the process. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to also thank city staff and the commissioners who worked so hard on this project. I completely agree with the decisions that were made here. The suggestions that were made here. And I also think that in terms of having the one meeting, this is the reason that the Planning Commission is here. And so I think if we're going to have one meeting, it should actually be here because it is recorded and the City Council has complete access to it. So it's as if the City Council is here when residents testify. So I think it's really important to make this simpler. And allow the city to react more rapidly to things. So I think this is a great thing, and I agree with it.
All right, so maybe just a final comment on it. It seems like communication is a big piece of what we should elaborate on or, continue on to further work plans. If we are going to keep this in a feedback loop, we should probably commit to reviewing this process on our work plan annually for the next 2 years, and maybe a big component would be the communication piece. From doing some research, just so you know, a good reference point of this is if you just type in Eden Prairie public hearing, they have a workflow that pops up. They also do things one step further where they have a GIS, if you're familiar with that, where the developments are noted on that. So every public hearing, like you could pull up your home and see what's been approved around you. So there's other things that we can do to communicate and visualize change and what's happening, where I think there is this feeling of a vacuum things go into and it's hard to navigate. So that should be just something we elaborate on to our commitment of reassessing if people agree. It seems like communication's a big piece of that, and we'll be happy to bring that before the City Council at the work session next week, assuming everyone's good. I don't know if we need a straw poll or anything, but this is what we're proceeding with, and it sounds like everyone was in support. We'll add some notes about our commitment to communication, and maybe that's our commitment to an ongoing work plan item. Okay. That sound good, everyone? Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. That's it for that. So, nice. Not quite 8:48, but hey. So, third to last, chair and member comments. Does anybody have any further ones? Yeah, Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we are working on parking requirements in the city, and it's kind of sad to see that we have the 4500 France building, which is, kind of the model new building in the 44th and France district. And, there was a proposal for a restaurant there, which would really activate the corner and really help the neighborhood. And, it wasn't approved because of parking ordinance. And I have to say that now it has been replaced with I won't say what it is or whatever, but it's a service business, which is, fine, but it's not really going to activate the neighborhood the way a restaurant would. So I think we really need to act, and the council needs to act on parking sooner rather than later, so we have active neighborhoods. So thank you.
Good comment. It's probably something Kerry's about to bring up for his comments, but Commissioner Elkire, former ex-commissioner, who had to step away because of moving basically across the country, he was the one chairing the parking ordinance work item, so we need to find someone else. And maybe we just open it for discussion now. I'm assuming that's what you're going to bring up.
It was. We don't necessarily have to even decide tonight, but maybe commissioners want to think about wanting to take the lead. And
so I know you're involved, Lou, right? And are you involved with that? No? You were? Okay. And then former Commissioner Agnew, who's now on the council, was too. So, yeah, we have an opportunity for either one of you to lead, but I think certainly we want someone else to be in that group more than just two of you. It'd be good to have at least 3, even 4.
Probably 4 for this one.
Yeah. So just something for everyone to think about. What you haven't seen is so many prior meetings, parking has completely controlled what we end up getting from a development, pros and cons that come with that. And it has affected the use, the shape, the success of so many projects in our nodes, and so we need to get a handle on that.
Yeah, and the sketch plan we saw tonight where they're short, and that's based on the new ordinance, they're that short. If we were on the old one, it would have been 200 some short. So yeah, it's something for people to think about, and we can assign someone at the next meeting.
Any other chair and member comments before I turn it over to Carrie? Yeah, Commissioner Smith.
Just general comments. I think, I thought Lou was going to bring this up, but climate change is always something that we got to keep in the front of our minds. I think since the last meeting that we've had, I think the United Nations Climate Group talked about the urgency of making big changes before 2040. And I think, being a part of the city and being on the Planning Commission, we also have to make sure and stress the need to reduce, reuse, and put some kind of environmental requirements on new developments that come up in the city. So that's just keeping that in front of our minds. The other point is just on technology. Technology is happening really fast. I'm sure you guys have heard of ChatGPT and different AI technologies out there.
Did you hear this speech, or did...
No. Oh, did ChatGPT do it? No. But I think the reason why I bring it up is, as we think about, the Planning Commission, we think that it's an old institution, right, where things go laboriously through. But if we could find ways of being creative that could speed up what we do in an effective way, using new technology, I think we should be open to it. I don't have any answers. Just want to plant that seed now so that as we think about the future, we can think about using technology different to help make our jobs more effective. So that's it.
Any other comments from Commissioner? All right, turn it over to staff for any comments.
Just a quick update. Council hasn't taken action on anything that the Planning Commission has moved forward, but just want to update on the U.S. Internet, the little building there on Xerxes. They submitted some revised plans yesterday that show solid brick on the north and east side all the way up, and not the cultured stone. It's a natural brick. I'll email that to the commission so you can take a look at that. So they've eliminated that variance. They still don't have windows in, but at least they eliminated probably the most difficult variance. The city council will make a decision on that next week. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Carrie. And again, thank you, staff, who are still sitting here through way past 8:38. You guys do a lot for the city and have done a lot to help prepare for some of our discussion tonight. So we thank you and look forward to next Tuesday where we continue some of that. With that, I will welcome someone to please adjourn this meeting. Motion, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Meeting adjourned.